for those of you who might be discovering my channel right now, or as a Twitch bot or as a YouTube bot in the future, regardless of the method. For those of you, some references before we begin. My analyses are unscripted. That's why you will see that I won't be kind of like one of those stupid robots, like those stupid robotic analysis that you see a lot nowadays. My analyses are unscripted. I just use my memory. That's why it's natural that perhaps we have to cover a lot of things. It's a massive game, and perhaps you'll see that I have to think at some moments, and that's perfectly fine, because I hate robotic analysis that are like I'm here reading a fucking spreadsheet with everything to tell you in a robotic way. It doesn't work like that. This will be a natural analysis. I hate when they're not natural over at YouTube, so keep that in mind. This is not scripted. This is just using my memory for 2 to 4 hours until we have covered all of the aspects and everything that Sacred 2 has to offer. As I've said, long-standing followers of the channel, besides, as always, of the Twitch channel, as always, thank you from the bottom of my heart for having discovered the channel through Sacred 2 or other games. Deep thanks, and for appreciating my analysis. Second thing, people, for those of you watching this in the future as a YouTube bot, remember that you don't have the panels that we have over here at Twitch. So my analysis involved the use of metaphysics and philosophically realist approach to game analysis, which I am going to once again summarize for you briefly in detail, so you know why I will analyze the game the way I'm going to analyze it in a matter of half an hour or 20 minutes after I have defined the method of analysis. I've decided to include this specifically for YouTube viewers, because otherwise you guys don't have a reference of how I constantly analyze games here on Twitch. So you'll have first the definition of the methodology, and then we'll go over the categories as we usually do, just so you have a recording of why I'm going to analyze the game the way I'm going to analyze it. So let's begin with the definition of our method of analysis, because we have a long analysis ahead of us. Let us begin. As you know, people, if you come over here over at Twitch, if you drop by the Twitch stream, you will realize in my panels I have a lot of explanations about how my analyses are metaphysically realist analysis, basically involving philosophical realism, which is the opposite of relativism, and basically the main premise of a philosophically realist analysis is that when we define metaphysical reality, when we define existence, we don't define it as it is usually unconsciously defined by relativist game reviewers. Generally, people, I'll try to do this as brief as possible. When you define reality as the sum of our mental perceptions, opinions, or doxas, as we used to call them in ancient Greece, when you unconsciously define metaphysical reality and metaphysical entities in it as the sum of our mental perceptions, of our opinions, simply the sum of those opinions define reality. That's usually how relativism works. It's a matter of mental perception. It's a matter of opinion. It's something that must have happened to you. It's to you all watching this as a YouTube pod. Pretty much when you have a discussion with someone, it doesn't need to be a violent discussion or anything like that. An intellectual debate, any intellectual debate you could possibly think of, and the person is cornered, the person doesn't have any more logical arguments, generally the person will say, alright, but that's your opinion and this is mine and that's it. That is exactly what we are not going to do here, because that's relativism, and because that makes it impossible to transcend our mental perception and define metaphysical reality, right? It's a matter of two mental perceptions. Relativism generally works like this. Two mental perceptions. You have your opinion, I have mine, but objective conclusions are never reached as a direct consequence of that mindset. That's precisely what we are not going to do. What we are going to do is to use philosophical realism. Why? Because, as I always mention in my analysis, while relativism works at ruling a country, at for example, creating laws or organizing a society in general, we all vote. Think about your own Congress or Parliament. In the case it's a European country, Congress in the case of us, North American and South American countries. And as I always mention, think about those. Think about your own Congress or Parliament. The congressmen basically raise their hands and they vote, and the majority of mental perceptions, of opinions, of doxas, as we used to call them in ancient Greece, rules. We vote and majority rules. That is completely untenable and inefficient, absolutely useless at analyzing isolated objects, because it is impossible to reach metaphysical reality through the simple sum of opinions as your definition of reality. Because a person will have a mental perception, I will have another mental perception, and that's it. We never reach an objective conclusion. This is precisely what we are going to do here on the channel. As I've said, discarding relativism, we'll use philosophical realism. What's the point then? What's the point? Precisely. Since metaphysical reality isn't the sum of our mental perceptions, but an external entity, an external metaphysical entity, when compared to our opinions, to our mental perception, we will use it because it's more effective at analyzing isolated objects. The example that I always use, and please, well, I gave you a disclaimer for followers of the Twitch channel, and over at Discord they must be fed up of listening to me comment this constantly, pretty much. As I always mention, people, when we do this comparison between two mental perceptions, there will always be one out of two opinions. There will always be one that is closer in its description, in its accuracy of its description of metaphysical reality. The description of metaphysical reality will be more accurate out of two mental perceptions, out of two opinions. Of course, we cannot rule a society or organize it with that, but when it comes to analyzing isolated objects, it's more effective, as I constantly say on stream. Right, people. So I have already given you the theory, the methodology of the theory, the theory of the methodology, that we are going to employ when analyzing games. But I'll give you also a down-to-earth example that I always do on stream. That's why I say Discord members and followers of the channel, old followers of the channel, they already know about this. But for those of you watching this as a YouTube VOD, pretty much, so I leave it attached to the analysis. Let's get to a down-to-earth example. People, this is a gaming mouse, right? It's a gaming mouse. But what if I asked you, what if I posed the question, why is it a gaming mouse? Is it a gaming mouse? Why is it that your mind defines it as a gaming mouse? Why? Why is it a gaming mouse? The logical answer that most of you would logically tell me, it's absolutely natural, it would be to tell me that this is a gaming mouse, that we refer to it as a gaming mouse, that we call this a gaming mouse, because we have all agreed to call it like that. There you can see the perfect fallacy and inefficiency of relativism at analyzing isolated objects, right? Because if I say that it is correct to call it a gaming mouse, because we have all agreed collectively, the sum of our mental perceptions have agreed to call it like that, and its metaphysical entity has to be referred to as a gaming mouse because we decided collectively to call it like that, there isn't any logical background behind it. It's just the sum of our mental perceptions. Let's get to the realist analysis. This, and you will see the perfect difference if you're watching this as a YouTube, but you'll appreciate it. This is a gaming mouse, because it's the methodology of our analysis. This is a gaming mouse, not because of our sum of mental perceptions. It is a gaming mouse because it's a specific combination of molecules and particles that is so specific, so precisely specific, that could never be, for example, a chair. So, out of two mental perceptions, calling this a chair or calling this a gaming mouse, out of two mental perceptions, there will always be one that is closer in its description to metaphysical reality. Even by 0.0000001%, even by 1%, even by a slight detail, it is objectively more accurate to call this a gaming mouse and not a chair. Why? Because it's a specific combination of molecules and particles that simply is completely different when compared to a chair. The description of calling this a gaming mouse is objective. The existence of this metaphysical entity, it's external when compared to my mental perception. It doesn't matter if my mind decides to call this a chair. It is still a gaming mouse. Even if we all agree to call it a chair, and humanity has been brainwashed to call this a chair for whatever reason, it will still be metaphysically a gaming mouse. Because its metaphysical entity and essence, they are both external when compared to my mind. We can use even a closer example, and I'll prove it to you. Between calling this, we'll use an even more subtle example that I always use. Between calling this a gaming mouse and calling this an electronic device, they are pretty close. It is still more objectively accurate. My mental perception is closer in its description to metaphysical reality, to describing metaphysical reality, if I call this a gaming mouse instead of an electronic device. Why? Even by 1%, even if it is also an electronic device, calling this a gaming mouse also incorporates the idea of shape. This object, this metaphysical entity, it's a specific combination of molecules and particles which has the shape of an animal with which the human race has been in contact with for millions and millions of years, and subconsciously our brain associates the abstract concept of gaming mouse with the shape of an animal that we have been in contact with for millions of years. It has the very same shape, this metaphysical entity. So it is more objectively accurate to describe this as a gaming mouse when compared to describing this as an electronic device. See, even by 1%, even by 0.001%, out of two mental perceptions, calling this an electronic device or calling this a gaming mouse, out of those two mental perceptions, it is much more accurate to describe this as a gaming mouse. So it is objectively, it's not a matter of my mental perception, it is more objectively accurate to describe it like that. There's a more objective mental perception out of the two of them, out of three, out of four, out of all of the mental perceptions that humanity is constantly having for every millisecond, constantly, even right now, all human beings. That is the methodology that we are going to apply to our game, that we apply to our game reviews here on the channel and for the final analysis of Sacred 2. We will try through our mental perception, through our reverse engineering of my mental perception in this case, to try to reach metaphysical reality in our description of the game. direct consequence that philosophical realism has in games is that and it must have happened to people, is that most game reviewers, most professional gaming press will tell you that the fact that you like or dislike a game, it's a matter of mere subjective mental perception. The second you do that, the second I tell you that a game is good or bad, according to your own opinion, according to your own mental perception, and this is the very reason why relativism is ineffective at analyzing isolated objects like movies, books, video games, or a very gaming mouse, or a simple gaming mouse. It's because relativism changes the focus of the analysis from the object, in this case the video game, to the subject. It changes the focus of the analysis from the object to the subject. In the case of the chair and the gaming mouse, you can call this a chair or a gaming mouse according to your mental perception, without any logical reasons. So, pretty much, in the case of video games, the game will be good or bad depending on my own opinion, on my own mental perception of metaphysical reality. There's no dissociation between metaphysical reality and my mental perception, and the sum of our opinions defines metaphysical reality. And as I've said, that's completely untenable and useless at analyzing isolated objects. It works for organizing a society, it doesn't work for analyzing isolated objects. Or, in this case, it doesn't matter if the object it's material, it's composed of matter, or if it's composed of bits in a screen and it's more abstract. Doesn't matter. It's the same concept. So the direct consequence of doing a relativist gaming review is that the quality of a game will be completely subjective according to personal taste. That is precisely what we are going to completely discard and eliminate out of our analysis that we are going to do today. But just so you know the methodology, we will base our analysis on I base all of my analysis on a 5-pronged system that you'll see for the duration of this long review that we are going to do, that will try to reverse engineer my mental perception of the game to reach metaphysical reality, a common ground between all of your mental perceptions of the game and my mental perception of the game, so we can all together reach metaphysical, objective metaphysical reality. Perfect. So, the quality of a game, as a conclusion, isn't a matter of personal taste. For example, it's a matter of how do you describe metaphysical reality. It's an objective matter. It is true that one can have preferences, that one can like one genre more than the other one, but for example, I would never say that, I don't know, a game that I liked a lot, subjectively, my mental perception, is the best game of all time. For example, imagine if someone only played Fortnite for 15 or 20 years, which is the case for a lot of people, and they say it's the best game of all time. And most people will have the reaction, when confronted with that claim, that it is wrong. But most people won't be able to tell that person why it is objectively wrong. It's not a matter of our mental perception of it, because we know that the level design complexity, the gameplay mechanic, the abstract model of the gameplay mechanics and their complexity, a lot of things that you'll see once we get to the analysis of Sacred 2, the graphics quality, everything, objectively in a comparison with other games, Fortnite is simply not the best game of all time. It is objectively wrong to say that, for example. Even if it's your favorite game, that's perfectly acceptable, it's your mental perception, but when trying to reach the common ground of metaphysical reality and describing the metaphysical entity of Fortnite as the best game of all time, it is objectively wrong. See that I can do a dissociation between my mental perception, or in this case the mental perception of that individual. My favorite game of all time is Star Wars: The Republic, and I know that there are cases that, for example, Baldur's Gate influenced much more the classic RPG genre, just as a random example. And like that is the same in the mind of this person who thinks that Fortnite is the best game of all time. Subjectively, it doesn't change the fact that objectively, that it is metaphysically objective to consider other games as the best games of all time. Pretty much. So, direct consequence, we're not going to do a subjective analysis. I won't tell you that, for example, you will like Sacred 2 as a direct consequence. If you like Diablo 2, you will like Sacred 2, because I'm not giving you a logical reason behind it, which is what most reviewers usually say. Most reviewers usually say if a game is addictive, it's good. If it's not addictive, it's not good. And that's because they are unable to reverse engineer the logical process behind reaching metaphysical reality. They are stuck in their own mental perception. So it is actually addictive. Then the immediate question we should pose is, why is it addictive? Generally because there's a psychological sense of progression which creates that feeling of addictiveness in the brain, in the brain of a player, due to a psychological sense of progression that the game is able to create on the player. Good people, I think that's enough. We have a long analysis ahead of us, so without further ado, you already have the methodology that we are going to use. Everything perfectly explained in a very brief way in 20 minutes. It's a very complex topic to talk about in 20 minutes. If you like the topic, I highly recommend you drop by the stream and we talk about it as we usually do if you are watching this as a YouTube pod in the future. Alright. Today we have a very special case, the case of a split second. Welcome both Twitch viewers, as I said, and YouTube viewers. In case you're watching this as a YouTube pod in the future, you come from watching the analysis methodology that I always include at the beginning of each case when we do the final metaphysical analysis. So you already have had all of the information required, and without further ado, let's get to it. The case of a split second, this racing game that was released back in 2010, in a period of time in which kart racers weren't as popular as they are today. And I wanted to begin, as I always do. Let me see that everything is perfectly working. There we go. We begin with the genre classification of split second. Pretty much the genre classification is absolutely required because it will influence the rest of the 5 categories of the analysis that I always love to get into once I am done with it. So, genre classification, people. Split second. You've all seen it in these 3 days of gameplay that we've spent playing it, and pretty much as you can see, and just as a viewer of the channel highlighted, this game has two different genres that could be considered quite opposite originally. A demolition derby racing game, in a pretty classic style, with arcade racing mechanics instead of simulation, in the same vein as Burnout, Wreckfest, lots of demolition racers that you have seen and love. Flatout, for example. Well, we could also cite the nemesis of this game, which is Blur. But well, first of all, I wanted to highlight that regarding this first portion of the genre classification, which is the demolition derby and the arcade racing mechanics that it has, I would say that the main influence, I will cite 2 games as the main influences. First, in terms of physics, handling of the car, and which is the control of the car, I'll cite Ridge Racer. The handling is very similar to Ridge Racer. In terms of the crashing mechanic, something that I'll get into once we get to the gameplay mechanics of the game, I will cite Burnout. Burnout is quite important. So we have Burnout and Ridge Racer in terms of controls and pretty much the crashing mechanic of the game, the damage system. So we have that. Those two constitute, which would be the first pole, the first the first part of the genre classification. There we have the first genre that it belongs to. But then there's a second genre, which isn't Demolition Derby, which isn't arcade racing by itself, which is the kart racer genre. So Split Second sits perfectly between kart racers, Mario Kart, Sonic All-Stars Racing Transformed, Crash Team Racing, F1 All-Stars, Little Big Planet Karting. You have thousands of examples. The classic kart racers, the Scars, for example, that we've talked about sometimes on the channel with another viewer. Precisely, Scars is another great example. The classic kart racers that basically Mario Kart popularized in the 90s, in the early 2000s with Mario Kart 64, Mario Kart Double Dash, etc, etc, etc. So, we have these two genres. Split Second sits perfectly in the middle between those two, between a demolition derby with arcade racing mechanics, Burnout for the arcade racing mechanics, Ridge Racer, and for example Wreckfest or Flatout for the demolition derby part of it. I think Dirt Showdown was another great example, another great recommendation that, for example, you can get. That one had also demolition derby mechanics. All right, so Split Second sits right in the middle between those two. Regarding the kart racing genre, it is like that because of the gameplay mechanic, which is the main draw of the game that I wanted to get into. But as for the genre classification, you know that I've already said that this is a hybrid, but that's not a metaphysically logic response, because if I say it's a hybrid, that implies that it inherits a percentage of DNA from both genres, which is true, it is true, but that is also true for all games. That's a very relativist conclusion in terms of the genre classification, because pretty much I'm just telling you that it inherits elements from both of them. Just like I did with Sacred 2 when I said that it had the great conundrum was if it was an MMORPG or an isometric action RPG, and I ended up saying it was an isometric MMORPG, but due to the fact that the quest density and the level design and everything was much more predominant than the isometric action RPG portion of it, for example the camera, the level design, I deemed the level design as a more predominant element than the camera angle of the game. That's why even if I said isometric MMORPG, I ended up saying that the genre was, at the end of the day, MMORPG with an isometric camera. Now, with the case of a split second, or in the case of a split second, I would say that between arcade racing, demolition derby, or other arcade racing variations, and kart racer, I would say it leans towards kart racer. The more predominant element is the kart racing mechanics. I'll get as to why in a minute, now that we get into the gameplay category of the analysis. So, as for the genre classification, conclusion, it's a kart racer because of the predominance of the gameplay mechanic that I am about to describe now that we get into the gameplay category of the analysis. The power play mechanic. The main draw of the game, we are talking about the base of the game, the main reason as to why this game stands out and deserves to be played, the main reason why this game deserves to be remembered, and why this game at the end of the day represents an achievement in terms of innovation for the racing genre. The main draw of the game, basically the main idea behind it. A moment of brilliance, I would add to it, the power play mechanic. What's the power play mechanic? Let's begin with a mental simulation of it. I also do believe, besides everything that you saw if you're watching this as YouTube, but in the intro, about the metaphysical methodology, that a good reviewer always ensures that whoever is watching the analysis, a lot of YouTube bots feel the need to require to include gameplay constantly, and that is because generally the reviewer doesn't have the ability to create a mental simulation vivid enough in the audience mind. So as I always say, let's begin with a simulation and you'll see how perfectly you can imagine it without watching a second of the gameplay. You have your car, right? With the handling of Burnout or Ridge Racer. You start racing through a track like in any other racing game. You go with your car, and certain actions, certain pure racing elements of the gameplay mechanics, like drifting, drafting, passing opponents, drift passing opponents, jumps, airtime technically, all of those pure racing elements. Please remember this element that I'm mentioning, because it's extremely important in terms of the integration that we are going to do then with the level design. All of those pure racing elements, as you drive through the course, as you race through it, those are part of the economic system of the game. Why? Because they feel the power play meter, which are 3 bars that are part of the user interface and are right behind your car. And you have basically 3 bars. There are 3. 2 of them are blue and the last one is red. So you feel the power play meter through the economic system of the game, through pure racing elements. Right. You feel that. It doesn't take a lot of time. The main source of that economic income is drifting most of the time, but all of the sources that I mentioned are all worth the same in terms of feeling it. The more you drift, the faster it gets filled. Now, once a single, I mentioned that it has kind of like 3 bars, right? There are 3 bars, 3 power play bars, right? As soon as you feel only one, you can trigger the main mechanic that I have been mentioning, and the one element responsible for classifying this game's genre as kart racer, as being more predominantly a kart racer than a pure racing game, arcade racing, demolition derby, etc., etc., etc. So the power play, you can trigger a power play. What happens when you trigger a power play? Instead of having the classic Mario Kart power-up or weapon, whatever you may want to use, however you may want to call it, the power play triggers environmental hazards. And this is the key of the game. Why? Let's get into it, people. I will also make a reference to the level design here, because it's technically the integration of the level design with the gameplay mechanics. We're in a bit of a limbo. It's part of the gameplay mechanics, but it's also part of the level design. That's the key and majestic part of this game. The most brilliant part of this game, the most brilliant idea that it has. In this game, let's run the simulation of what would happen mentally. Let's run the simulation of what would happen in Mario Kart. You race through the course and you physically get a power-up, a weapon. The weaponry system of the game has a physical distribution on the track, right? It has a physical distribution. You go by the power-up, you grab it, and if your cart itself makes contact with that power-up, you get it. It gets transferred to your arsenal, generally to the top right corner of the screen, and there you can activate it whenever you deem it convenient, adding the portion of strategic gameplay that kart racers have and that pure arcade racing games don't have. Another reason as to why I classified this as a kart racer some minutes ago. So the weapons, let's focus on this element, please, people. The weapons are physically distributed. In traditional kart racers, that happens with all of them. Pretty much even Blur, which was the direct competition of this game. So, the huge idea, the great idea that this game had was that it, please pay attention because it's a very abstract concept, it fused the environmental hazards that you would also get in Mario Kart. It fused that with the weaponry system of a kart racer. It fused a portion of the level design with the gameplay mechanics. Something extremely unusual. I know that most reviewers usually say, well, if it's addictive, the game is good, but if it's not addictive, the game isn't good. No, there's a logical explanation behind it, always. And in this case, is that this game is extremely unusual. It's extremely unusual. In this game, there's an extremely unusual phenomenon. Fusing the level design with the gameplay mechanics. In Mario Kart, besides getting the physical weapons, you can also fall off a cliff, right? You can pretty much respawn due to falling off a cliff or a mushroom or whatever. Pretty much. In split second, while that can still happen, that I'm going to refer to from now on as kind of like pure environmental hazards. The weaponry system in split second isn't physical. The power-ups are not distributed on the track, simply just so you make contact with them and you grab them and you use them. No, in this game, the most incredible idea is that they fused, as I've said, the hazardous environment with the weaponry system of the game. The traps of the environment, like falling off a cliff or whatever, they are fused with the weaponry system of the game. So, going back to what I was mentioning, you filled one bar of the power meter and you activate a power play. You activate a power play as you are driving and racing through the track. What is the power play used to? It's used to wreck rivals. That's the demolition derby part of the game, or the arcade racing part of the game. You use it to wreck rivals, the concept of wrecking, and that is also part of this ingenious system that Disney designed. The developer, the publisher of this game is Disney and BlackRock Studios, pretty much. You trigger the power play, right? You're racing, you fill the power meter through pure racing elements. That's the huge difference with classic kart racers, the economic system we'll get into in a moment. And you trigger the power play. And the power play activates a portion of the environment. For example, I'll give you empirical evidence and down-to-earth examples. Bombs falling from a helicopter, canyons exploding, kind of like with all of the rocks getting on the track, nuclear plants going down and destroying shortcuts, for example. That's something that I also wanted to highlight about the gameplay mechanics in a minute, or on that in a minute. And several other elements of the environment. For example, triggering a crane that does this movement, and basically it's kind of like a huge artifact that is being moved by said crane and hitting your car, kind of like getting in the middle of the track. Or, for example, buses, exploding buses that are kind of like rolling from left to right or right to left in the middle of while you are racing. Pretty much all of those. And as soon as you hit as soon as the opponent hits, or you can, if you didn't time it correctly, as soon as you hit one of those hazardous those environmental traps, pretty much is a level design fused with the gameplay mechanics. You crash, or the opponent crashes. They are wrecked. They are wrecked when they are hit by the bus, or when they hit the bus, or when they, for example, they start rolling, but for example, maybe they end up in the middle of the track. Some of them, or the rocks that I mentioned at the beginning. Several of them. Some of them remain on the track after used for the rest of the race, like what I said, the buses or the rocks. Others, like the crane that I mentioned, no, or the helicopter bump, they just drop or they just activate, and they activate, and pretty much you can activate them again, but they don't leave any trace of their original triggering on the track, right? So pretty much that's a small difference, but I bet you get the point by now. You trigger the power play, and the level design is fused with the gameplay mechanics. I have further proof of this, which is the main reason why this game is so good in terms of the gameplay mechanics, which is that not only the power plays are used for triggering the environmental hazards, but they are also used to create shortcuts in the game. Yes, you can activate the power plays without any kind of difference. Actually, it's the same system. You activate them as you get closer, as you get close to a shortcut, and it will activate for some seconds, and then it will immediately go back to normal. For example, a gate, you can open gates in this game through with this. You activate a gate, and the gate is open, right? So the gate is open, and the second that happens, you get through the shortcut, but then the gate goes back to its original position of being closed. So if you had someone some seconds behind you, some in the middle of the race, right behind you, you activate that shortcut, and that person will also be the opponent will also take advantage of that shortcut. But if you have another racer some seconds behind you with a bigger distance between you and him, the shortcut will go back to the original position, and the person will crash. The person will crash because there's a cooldown period before that shortcut. There's a small cooldown period before that shortcut can be activated again. So see how incredible it is. They turned a level design mechanic into a portion of the weaponry system of the game. The level design, once again, is fused with the gameplay mechanics of the game. I want you to remember this if you ever see this case of a split second, if you ever decide to play this game, because it's the main idea that metaphysically objectively makes it good. Because the variety this adds to the gameplay mechanics, it's absolutely amazing, because it completely breaks through the limitation of physical weapons on a track. It breaks through the limitation of it breaks through the limitation of having to being forced to make contact with the weapons. And I know that sounds like a very simple concept, but if you think about it, it's much more abstract to picture the mental model of the weaponry system as a player in split second than in a lot of kart racers. Why? Because in kart racers you have a visual evidence of what to do. So there's a sense of a space. There's a sense of dimensional space. In split second, this sense of space, of physical space, of dimensional space, it's removed out of the equation. It's much more abstract as a player to think about the weaponry system in this game than in a kart racer like Mario Kart, Sonic All-Stars Racing Transformed, etc, etc, etc. Little Big Planet karting. But going back to the power play mechanic, you can activate the power plays, you can activate the shortcuts, and you can also activate, and this leads me to the most, perhaps the worst element that I consider about Mario Kart, which is the blue shell. Pretty much, the weaponry system in Mario Kart, as I've said, is physical, and there's kind of like a power-up among all of the power-ups. There's a power-up which is the blue shell that we all know, which basically gets to the one who's in first place, the leader of the pack, and basically it's a warranted 100% attack, pretty much, that will ensure that the first racer is absolutely stopped in place. So there's an element of compensation in terms of the one who's going first and the rest of the racers. There's that is done. Nintendo implemented that so that player wouldn't get a huge advantage, and it would kind of like enable comebacks in that sense. Right, the equivalent of that in split second is the level 2 power play. As I've said, remember, you have 3 bars of the power meter, 2 of them are blue, 1 of them is red. The red one, once you continue filling and filling the bars and you get to the 3rd bar, that 3rd bar is red for a reason. You activate a different button on your joystick, and pretty much it triggers a huge explosion, generally, that completely transforms the level design of the track entirely, creating a different track, right? Or at least 50% of it, roughly. It completely changes the track itself. This is another great idea that the developers of Split Second had, because it adds a lot of level design variety in a pretty unusual way, which is the integration of the gameplay mechanics on the level design. Just as I mentioned previously, that the level design gets fused with the gameplay mechanics, it gets integrated into the gameplay mechanics through the weaponry system. Here's the other way around. The gameplay mechanics change the level design of the course, making it completely different when you trigger a level 2 power play. Now, even with that, that's kind of like the equivalent of the blue shell, because you destroy a huge portion of the racetrack, and the racers caught inside of it, generally the leader of the pack, as I've said, and the second one and the third one if you're losing the race, they all get wrecked at the same time. It's kind of like a massive wreck because it destroys a portion of the track directly. That's the equivalent of the blue shell. So they thought about a kind of like a way to ensure that the players could make a comeback if they were losing the race, to of course add to the competition of the race, and that's perfectly fine, and to add to the intensity and the tension of the race. So it's not just like in for example in an RTS game, you can, since it's an extremely mechanical genre, once you get the advantage, it's much more difficult to turn around an unfavorable situation, a disadvantageous situation around. It's much more difficult. Think about a MOBA, think about which isn't Heroes of the Storm, because in that one experience is shared, and that pretty much is the equivalent of what is being implemented here. But think about, for example, League of Legends or Dota 2 or RTS games like StarCraft. Since there's a component of hard-coded economy in those games, and it's extremely mechanical, and there's a component of actions per minute, it's extremely difficult to get a comeback. In Mario Kart, on the contrary, I think it's way too easy to get a comeback. There's kind of like, the idea is to strike a balance that Mario Kart definitely doesn't do because of that blue shell mechanic, because it's a warranted hit. I think that, for example, the bullet the bullet or the star in Mario Kart, those power-ups are much more balanced. For example, if they would allow you to get the bullet, the bullet that basically is kind of like, it's also in Disney Speedstorm, for example, that mechanic that perfectly compensates it. If they would allow the bullet to be triggered in a much more, for example, out of 8 racers, if you are 5th, they should allow the bullet, for example. Or if the first racer gets a lot of advantage, they should allow the second one to get that bullet, right? But it's not the case. Generally, you only get the bullet if you are last or second to last, which I think undermines the concept of the pure racing skill that Mario Kart has. Even if it's arcade, it doesn't matter. You have to drift and you have to do all of those things. So coming back to split second, the level 2 power play ensures this in a pretty elegant way, in a pretty well designed way, without having 100% efficiency like the blue shell, which I think is the most efficient solution at the end of the day. For example, the first game I played ever, Supercomputer Animal Racing Simulator, or SCARS, does have kind of like a blue shell. It does have a blue shell, but first of all, it doesn't stop you with the intensity of the blue shell, and second, there's actually a power-up that grants you immunity, and you can potentially hold it, have it ready, that prevents the equivalent of the blue shell. It's basically two rotating protection. It's kind of like a protection shield with 2 lines rotating around the car. Basically, that gives you total immunity against the blue shell. So it ensures that the first player, if the first player constantly gets that power up in SCARS, you can avoid the blue shell. And even if you get hit by the blue shell, it's not as terrible as the blue shell itself. So as you can see, this is a quite ancient conundrum, a quite ancient problem, how to balance these two polar opposite problems, these two polar opposite stances, let's say, of the same problem, ensuring that the gameplay is always competitive and balanced. That means ensuring that the leader of the pack doesn't get away easily and can just get away, and the weaponry system cannot physically get to it. That would destroy the purpose of a kart racer completely. But just as I said, the blue shell is an extreme solution. The other polar opposite is the blue shell, precisely, making it so powerful, making the weaponry system so brutal that you can never get any advantage. And if you do that, you destroy the pure racing portion of the gameplay mechanics. So I bet you see the relationship here. If you allow the player to rely on pure racing skills and get away without any kind of problem, without any kind of countermeasure, then the pure racing mechanic of the game becomes predominant, way too predominant, and it becomes stagnant, and there's no difference between that and a pure kart racer. I would say that the greatest example of this would be Sonic All Stars Racing Transformed, because it's much more difficult to. You can get the advantage if you drive pretty well, and you can definitely get away with that. So there's a predominance of the pure racing element. Then we have Mario Kart. The predominance of the kart racer element. The weaponry system is so predominant that the blue shell will ensure that pretty much it's a 100% guaranteed countermeasure that will completely destroy the one who's first, and the pure racing skill of the gameplay mechanics gets completely undermined. It gets completely undermined. So at that point, since it gets completely undermined, the pure racing skill portion of the gameplay mechanics, it's generally discarded altogether, except for the stat system that we'll get into in a minute. But Split Second and Scars and some other car racers have found an intermediate solution. An intermediate solution between those two. Like this. An intermediate solution. In Split Second, the level 2 power play destroys a portion of the track, but according to the track, it may only be used once. It's like a blue shell that you can only use once, and even so, it won't eliminate all of the rest of the racers at all. And what is even more, it doesn't have 100% efficiency. It doesn't have 100% efficiency because if the advantage is way too big, it doesn't hit the racer. So as you can see, and we can also cite Scars as an example, the blue shell equivalent will get to the first place, but if the player has immunity, if the racer who's first has immunity, it won't work altogether. There's a defense against it. So as you can see, the key to a perfect kart racer, is the balance between these two elements. A correct proportion of these two, of the predominance of these two genres: pure kart racing mechanics and kart racer and the weaponry system of the game, the kart racing mechanics. The balance between those two is extremely important because it's the key to a perfect kart racer. This is the main objective reason as to why Split Second is so efficient, because of the high degree of efficiency of the integration of the level design with the gameplay mechanics and the correct proportion of the pure racing elements and the weaponry system of the game within the gameplay mechanics. The degree of efficiency of the integration of the pure racing mechanics and the weaponry system of the game within the gameplay mechanics, and then the fact that it's fused with the level design. Precisely as I said, that's an extra part of it that adds a lot of innovation in that case. Alright, let's go back to a normal power play scenario. You trigger the power play and you don't destroy 50% of the track. You just activate what I have been saying: the helicopter dropping a bomb, the canyon exploding and dropping the rocks on the track, etc, 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 etc. The level 2 power plays. Regarding what I just said, the degree of efficiency of that integration, the key here is that you can avoid them as well. Not a single one of all of those power plays that I have been mentioning has 100% efficiency. Granted, in Mario Kart they don't as well. They don't have 100% efficiency, all of them as well. But in Split Second there's a huge difference, which is the fact that the pure racing element becomes predominant precisely in this moment. Something that in Mario Kart it does, but not with the degree of predominance of the pure racing element. Why? Because of the crashing that you have in a Split Second, because of the inherited crashing mechanic from Burnout. In Mario Kart, and you'll see what I mean in a second. In Mario Kart, you can avoid the different traps that for example the kind of like the red colored cube that you can leave as a trap, the bananas, or even the green shells that get spread around that are lying around when a player got hit by the lightning or something like that. The power-ups that basically are traps. Yeah, for example, in Scars there are two as well: the barrier and the three-shaped and the three-shaped trap, the star trap, the three-shaped star trap. Pretty much. The thing is that with the scars, there's a pretty efficient use of the environment, because in a lot of cliffs, for example, you cannot avoid them even if you jump, and you can jump in scars, something that you cannot do in Mario Kart. All right, but in Mario Kart you can drift and avoid them. The same goes with Sonic All-Stars Racing Transformed. Pretty much, you can avoid them. The pure racing mechanic of the game is employed, it's used to avoid the weaponry system of the game, the defensive weaponry system of the game, or the trap weaponry system of the game. The ones that are not active attacks. What happens in split second? While, as you can see, Mario Kart doesn't have 100% efficiency because you can evade the traps. If you get hit by a trap in Mario Kart, you lose a speed. You get slowed down. That's the huge thing. That's where the inherited element from Burnout comes into play. In Mario Kart, you get slowed down. In Sonic All-Stars Racing Transformed, the same. In Scars, the same. In Blur, the same. You get slowed down by the weapons. It's much more similar to Mario Kart in that sense. You get slowed down, right? In Split Second, you get the inherited Burnout mechanic of crashing. That's exactly when the demolition derby element that I mentioned comes into play. This mechanic, the crashing mechanic from Burnout, which is in turn inherited from demolition derbies, from games like Wreckfest or Flatout at the same time. In Split Second you crash. If the front of your car crashes into all of the hazardous environment power play systems power plays that I have been mentioning, the rocks, the bomb, well, not the bomb, the rocks that fell from that fell from the canyon and were lying around the course, the buses that were ignited and are in the middle of the track, or anything, or the shortcut, or the gate of the shortcut that I mentioned previously, or even any wall. If you hit any wall with the front of your car, you crash and you respawn and you lose some seconds. This completely changes the paradigm of the gameplay mechanics of the game, of a Split Second. Why? Because the second you do that, you are changing the philosophy behind the gameplay mechanics. You won't get slowed down, you will respawn. And there have been cases, for example, in Split Second, in which I crashed I crashed against the gate that was lowered because an opponent had triggered a shortcut previously, and I crashed, and I get respawned right behind that, and you can crash again. The same happens for the rocks of the canyon that I mentioned. You will respawn some meters behind them, and you'll have to avoid them again, for example. Or in case of the shortcut, you can activate it. You can activate it if you have a power play. If not, you'll have to take another route. But pretty much, it ensures that the player gets through it. It's not consumed by the cart. In Mario Kart, it is. For example, if you get hit by a banana, that banana disappears from the level design of the track. See how interesting it is. In this case, the rocks don't disappear. They remain there for the remaining for the remainder of the race, pretty much. According to the track, you'll have different cases. Some of them perhaps don't have as many traps, for example. They don't have as many power plays that were triggered. But well, that further adds to the abstract complexity of the level design and its integration within the gameplay mechanics, because some tracks will have a higher density of power plays and some will have a lower density. So see how complex the system is, see how many elements I highlighted. But pretty much, the fact at the heart of the gameplay mechanics, the inherited crash mechanic from Burnout, ensures that the gameplay remains fast, exciting, blood pumping, extremely tense, while adding a lot of dynamism, because you instantly respawn and you get a second chance, but you still lost some seconds. This is further exponentially enhanced in multiplayer. I've seen that the game, that you can still play the game online, at least on PC. There's a Discord dedicated to that, and I've seen a race online. I've seen how it works, and trust me, the elemental system, the elemental system, the power play system, gets triggered with a much higher frequency, for example, than the offline races that you've been seeing, that you've been watching me doing, and that immediately ensures that crashing adds that element of that component of dynamism. Crashing and respawning as that element of dynamism that, for example, Mario Kart doesn't have, because in Mario Kart you get slowed down, but you absorbed the environmental hazard, so it's no longer a problem until it is triggered again. And pretty much the fact that here you don't absorb the environmental hazards when you crash plays a much interesting role, because it adds to a component, or it creates a component of perpetual danger. It's continuous. It's just like what I mentioned with Sacred 2 and the psychological reward punishment economic system. It's continuous in this game. The rock remains there. You can crash again in lap 2, for example. And with that, the component of danger is continuous. Besides that, there are normal environmental hazards in some tracks. For example, you can fall off a cliff. It has happened to me. It does have, the game does have, the tracks of the game do have blind points. In which, for example, you can fall off a canyon. Those are kind of like the pure environmental hazards, as I've been mentioning, or like in Sonic All-Stars Racing Transform, that can happen as well. So yes, as you can see, the core of the gameplay mechanics, which I spent 48 minutes to get in depth to the metaphysical reality and explain the metaphysical reality behind it, is that basically that the level design is fused with the gameplay mechanics of the game, and the other thing that I mentioned at the beginning precisely is that the pure racing, because of all of this that I mentioned at the beginning, the pure racing mechanics of the game have a more predominant role, because they constitute the economic system of the game. I know it's pretty weird to talk about that in a racing game, but it is the case. What's the economic system in Mario Kart, in traditional kart racers, for example, in Blur? Zero. The economic system is just physically making contact with the power-up. And in the case of Mario Kart Double Dash, for example, or Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, they added 2 slots. It's in the slots. You can hold the weapons. You can hold on to them, and, for example, save a pretty good weapon, even if you got it long ago in the first lap of the race, for example. And, for example, you can save a star for when you are first, if you ever get there. So you use your pure racing skills to get first, quite difficult, and then you trigger the star, and then you get the advantage. That's pretty much the economic component of the gameplay mechanics in traditional kart racers. In Split Second, the economic system of the game is represented in the power meter with the 3 bars, but it is incredible that the pure racing elements are the economic system of this game. Yes, because of what I said, drifting, drafting, all of the actions that feel that compose the economic system of the gameplay mechanics are pure racing elements. Now, one could argue that physically making contact with the power-up is, for example, a pure racing skill, because, for example, in Mario Kart there's a cooldown between one racer getting the power-up and the racer behind him getting it as well, because the cube disappears, the cube with the weapon disappears. There's also an element of randomness in Mario Kart, because the cubes are random. You cannot see the weapon. For example, in Scars that doesn't happen. The weapons are kind of like defined. They have different icons. In the case of a split second, it follows the system of Scars, because at the end of the day, the power-ups are fixed. They are not random when you trigger them. They have, and this is the brilliant idea behind them, they have a component of physical proximity to them. As you get close, the icon appears and you trigger the power play, but you know which power play you are triggering. You know the effect it will have, because there isn't a huge variation. There isn't a huge variation in terms of not remembering all of the power plays. All of the courses do have the same power play system. For example, the crane is repeated, the helicopter bomb is repeated, the canyon exploding it's repeated, the nuclear plants exploding and destroying the shortcuts, it's also repeated. All of the power plays are, you can identify them. There's a pattern of memorization that you can follow, just like with Scars, precisely, in which the weapons are defined. In Sonic All-Stars Racing Transformed and Mario Kart, they are random. The physical weapons are random. Here they are not random. So that adds a component of strategic value instead of randomness, which I think it is positive, because it encourages a strategic play much more instead of randomness. And then, as I've said, the integration is the key. You use the pure racing skills to fill the power meter bar, the power meter bars. There are 3 of them, and that constitutes the economic system of the game. 100%. That's the economic system of the game. So what's the economic system in Blur, Mario Kart, etc., as I was mentioning? Pretty much there isn't an economic system. The economic system is making contact with the physical weapon, but there isn't a concept of grinding. See how interesting it is? There isn't a concept of grinding beyond perhaps stacking the 2 slots of your weapons. And not all Mario Kart entries do have 2 slots. In Scars, for example, you have 2 slots. And so you can stack your... In Sonic All-Stars Racing Transform, you have 1, for example. Compare stacking 2 weapons to filling up the power meter. The abstract complexity of the economic system of a split second is higher. Why? Because the pure racing elements fill that power meter. They are the economic system of the game. They fill that power meter, and that has a psychological sense. It creates a highly efficient psychological sense of progression on the player's mind. It's much more efficient at being addictive, as we always, as reviewers usually like to say. It has a higher degree of psychological impact. Why? Because you have to grind for a longer period of time with a larger variety of pure racing elements. Quite interesting. Let's analyze the pure racing element of Mario Kart to get the power up. Make contact with the physical weapon. That's it. You got the weapon. That's it. It's one-dimensional. let's get into the pure racing element of a split second to accumulate the currency of the economic system of the game, which is the power meter. Drifting, drafting, airtime, pass, drift pass, close call. I forgot about that one. That's when you avoid crashing when a power play has been triggered. Close call. I've named at least, and maybe there's more. I've named at least six elements, pure racing elements, through which you can get the in-game currency of the economic system of the gameplay mechanics to get access to the weaponry system of the game. In Mario Kart, 1. Making contact with the physical weapon, and perhaps stacking the physical weapons if you play an entry like Double Dash or Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, in which you can stack them. But the pure racing mechanic is only one, making contact with the physical weapon. See how interesting it is that the abstract complexity of the economic system is also higher, because the variety through which you get the currency of that economic system is higher in its complexity. But Eraser, I can also drift in Mario Kart and do the things in split second. You can also drift, yeah, but they are not. But those pure racing mechanics. Let's pay attention to these people. I'm not saying that Mario Kart is terrible. It's the best kart racer of all time, Mario Kart. No one can dispute that. But it's because of different elements than the ones that I'm mentioning. It's because of different elements. It's because of how it influenced the genre itself, how it redefined the mechanics, because it basically invented the genre. It's much more influential in that sense, but not because of the abstract complexity of the integration. People, the integration of the economic system with the gameplay mechanics in split second has a higher degree of efficiency because of what I just said. Because as you can see, you have 6 ways of using the pure racing mechanics of the game that constitute to get the in-game currency, constituting the economic system of the game, and adding a lot of variety to it through the use of the power meter, because of everything that I said at the beginning of the analysis, that with the level 2 power play and everything, and the degree of efficiency that I got into. So it's a pretty complex case, a unique and complex case, because of what I said, because the degree of abstraction is different. The integration of the economic system with the gameplay mechanics is absolutely different. So I think we got the full circuit, the full framework of the gameplay mechanics. Pretty much, that's pretty much the core of it, in which the rest of the gameplay will unfold, and I'll get to it in a second. So that's the first element that I wanted to highlight. I know it was a long element, but I said it's the main element of the game. Pretty much a perfect integration with the hazardous environments and everything. Second, the artificial intelligence, the rubber banding, a topic that we always need to address in kart racers, in all racing games, pretty much. The artificial intelligence. I love how nowadays people say artificial intelligence this and this with ChatGPT, and I have been saying artificial intelligence for game reviews since at least 4 years ago and more. So, and that's the original technical term that we used back in the day with the RTS genre. I remember using it 20 years ago, and now people feel modern when they say it. All right. I bet it happens to all of you who have played old school games that you have been saying artificial, especially RTS games, the artificial intelligence of the game. Now, with kart racers, we have the infamous scene of rubber banding, of the rubber banding of the artificial intelligence. A lot of people say that rubber banding it's terrible, that it's shitty, that it's a cheap way to artificially enhance the difficulty of the gameplay mechanics. And while I agree that it is artificial and that a natural solution would be better, it's always the best. It's always the best, a natural solution, which I think only one game achieved, which is Forza Motorsport 2, because you can see a pattern of how constant the artificial intelligence is in Forza Motorsport 2 that you won't find in any other game at all. You can get the advantage and you can lose that advantage in such a dynamic way, in Forza Motorsport 2 that I haven't seen it in any other racing game ever. That's why I deem it as the best racing game of all time. Forza Motorsport only 2, not 3, not 1, only 2. But yeah, achieving that is extremely difficult, and it is true that most racers go for a rubber band artificial intelligence, which was the original solution of the arcades in the 90s, for example, when I played School Race and all of that. Let's get to the case of a split second. In Mario Kart, for example, the Double Dash, the artificial intelligence, it's quite amazing. I think it's the best. You can have a challenge even racing against the AI, and it feels a bit more dynamic than modern entries. The Mario Kart Wii was the downfall of difficulty in artificial intelligence, and pretty much Mario Kart 7 fixed it a bit, I believe, on the 3DS, and Mario Kart 8, they are better than Mario Kart Wii, but still they don't get to the perfection of Double Dash in terms of the artificial intelligence. Not perfection, because as I said, Forza Motorsport 2 is the perfection in that sense. Forza Horizon 1, for example, also has the worst, the nastiest artificial intelligence I've ever seen as a reference, and pretty much to the point it doesn't feel natural. The same goes for Mod Nation Racers as well. It has a pretty nasty artificial intelligence. Well, the case of a split second. In split second, there are some races of the campaign. More on that once we get to the level design. There are some races of the campaign that basically are way too easy. They're way too easy. The normal races, for example, in which the artificial intelligence represents the highest difficulty, because pretty much you are winning the race, you are in first place, but out of nowhere, you can look back in this game as well. Out of nowhere, the racers appear, and someone passes you, right? Passes right through you in a pretty weird way. It feels unnatural. It does feel unnatural. So in that sense, it's not perfectly executed, the artificial intelligence, and I think this is a critical flaw. It's not a slight flaw, people. The artificial intelligence does get a nice dose of rubber banding, which I think is good, but I would have made it much more extreme, because like this, it gets the worst of both worlds, which will lead me to the main flaw of the game, the main critical flaw of the game. It gets the worst of both worlds. It gets the unnatural feeling of rubber banding, which in that sense Forza Horizon 1 gets, or Mod Nation Racers gets. Both of those games get that artificial feeling. But in those games, when you select the hardest difficulty, that unnatural feeling of cranking up the difficulty so much gets so crazy, it gets so hard that you can feel that you are playing against humans. Or even if you are not playing against humans, let me rephrase that, you are playing against a challenge. You have a challenge. There's a sense of challenge. There's a sense of progression attached to that. There's a reason why extremely hard rubber banding artificial intelligence was a proven and tested formula back in arcade machines back in the 90s with Scud Race, Daytona, USA, and all of them. When there's a lack of a proper solution that is extremely difficult to narrow down and properly test and get down correctly and narrow down that feeling of narrowing down and dissipating and finally solving that feeling of 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 artificial of being artificial of being extremely artificial or unnatural. When you cannot get that divine solution of Forza Motorsport 2 that very few racing games get, when you cannot get to that pinnacle, that perfect degree of balancing of the artificial intelligence, when you cannot get that, the safe and tested formula is that of Mario Kart, is that of a Scud Race, is that of 99% of racing games from the 90s and early 2000s. Crank up the difficulty of the AI, make the rubber banding brutal so the player at least has a sense of challenge regardless of his skill level. The huge problem of a split second, the huge problem with Mario Kart as well, the critical flaw of all kart racers that I believe Sonic All-Stars Racing Transformed, for example, partially fixed, and only Forza Motorsport 2 completely fixed, but it's not a kart racer. It also happens in Blur. The huge critical flaw of all kart racers that with a high degree, that with different degrees of efficiency they try to solve, is the fact that the bots, the offline portion of the gameplay mechanics, always has two solutions: cranking up the rubber banding artificial intelligence, which I think is the best solution, or what I have been mentioning, the critical flaw. The game offline, Mario Kart, for example, the tournaments in Mario Kart, offline, it's way too easy. I will cite two examples that fix this. Only very few kart racers fix this. Mario Kart Double Dash, that game is difficult regardless of how much you play it, and the element of randomness is properly integrated because the weapons are also different. But the degree of difficulty is the same with Smash Bros. Melee, for example, with the Smash Bros. Melee. This is the huge scene of the kart racing subgenre. And the critical flaw of a split second, the critical flaw of modern entries of Mario Kart, the critical flaw of, I don't know, Disney Speedstorm or whatever. The offline portion gets way too easy. Now, I know there's a reason behind doing that, and you are saying, well, it's because of this. Yes, I know the reason you are thinking, people. I know the reason you are thinking, because multiplayer is encouraged. More on that in a minute. Let's get to the objective reality of what a perfect game would be. Mario Kart Double Dash and Sonic All-Stars Racing Transformed. Those two games have the highest degree of efficiency, without reaching the perfection of Forza Motorsport 2, of finally fixing the problem of a cranked up rubber banding artificial intelligence, of artificially making the racers more efficient, without getting to that, as I said, divine solution that still no one has been able to replicate. Those games, Sonic All-Stars Racing Transformed and Mario Kart Double Dash, they are able to retain the human essence of the multiplayer portion in the offline portion of the gameplay mechanics, I know it's a quite abstract concept, and you'll tell me, no, it's not the same, Eraser. Always the multiplayer will be much more difficult. Always going up against a human opponent is much more difficult. Yes, I know. But the overall proportion of the offline difficulty in those two examples, it still retains a high degree of efficiency at replicating, at least partially, the difficulty of the multiplayer portion of those games. In Split Second, in Mario Kart Modern Entries, which are not Double Dash, in Blur, in a lot of kart racers, F1 All Stars, for example, I believe had the same problem. Little Big Planet Karting, not Mod Nation Racers would be included as a third one. Sorry, I forgot about Mod Nation Racers, and I think it's the most efficient one, ironically. Mod Nation Racers, Mario Kart Double Dash, and Sonic All Stars Racing Transformed. Especially Mod Nation Racers. It's an exclusive game to the PS3. That one has the best rubber banding I've seen. It's absolutely brutal on hard difficulty. I highly recommend Mod Nation Racers. Damn it, sorry for forgetting that one. Mod Nation Racers, I'll repeat it even more. Those three games have as I've said, they have a degree of efficiency that at least partially replicates the difficulty derived from human interaction. They partially replicate the difficulty derived from human interaction of the multiplayer portion of their gameplay mechanics. See how interesting it is. As I've said, partially. It can never be perfect. They can never replicate a human. But for example, in Mod Nation Racers, I would say is the closest. So let's get to the critical flaw, to the games that don't do this correctly. Modern entries of Mario Kart, Split Second, Blur, F1 All Stars, for example, Little Big Planet Karting, for example. I think it was much easier, and many more. For example, Scars, the Super Race does have that. But well, this that I'm mentioning, this critical flaw that is the main flaw that has plagued kart racers all over the place throughout the years. It is intentionally introduced, but that's not an excuse for a gameplay design flaw of the artificial intelligence. That's not an excuse, at least not on my analysis. Not in my analysis, sorry. Not here. Because it still is a level, it still is a gameplay design flaw. Making the artificial intelligence not competitive. It still is a flaw. I'd take the rubber banding any day than an easy offline game but I'll tell you why. Because it destroys the replay value of the game completely. Eraser, the replay value of that game is the multiplayer. What I've been mentioning for several minutes. The multiplayer. Yeah, the multiplayer. We'll get to that in a minute. I'll address it in a minute. But as a preview, just take into account that the multiplayers run on servers that get shut down, and you lose a portion of the gameplay mechanics of the game. Right. In Split Second, in modern entries of Mario Kart, in modern kart racers, this is the biggest problem. The offline portion feels artificial. It feels unnatural. It feels that you're not playing against human opponents. But even if you're not playing against human opponents, you don't even get the challenge of the rubber banding artificial intelligence. This destroys replayability, and the second you destroy replayability, the second you degrade the efficiency of the psychological sense of progression on the player. The impact of that psychological sense of progression is destroyed. Why? Because the player is done with the tournament, is done with the campaign, is done with all of that, and that's it. The game completely lost its replay value. People, I know that these games are multiplayer oriented, but that's not an excuse for destroying the replay value, for degrading the replay value of them. The replay value derives from the multiplayer portion of the game. Yeah, and then my argument is, when they shut down the servers, what do? You can't do anything. Private servers by the community. Well, maybe it takes years after the community, if ever, designs private servers for the unique gameplay mechanics that you could potentially get in the kart racer that you are trying to play. Are there private servers of Blur? In split second, only in 2024, I saw that I read that the private servers went online, were revived. 2024. The game was released in 2010. It's a gap of 14 years without the component of replayability, and only because of the community, and which has a lot of issues with it. For example, the potential population that a community server can get is not the same as the official servers of the game that it can potentially get on release date. You destroy your original player base. It has a lot of consequences that could be easily bypassed if developers of kart racers would spend more time polishing the artificial intelligence. You cannot achieve the perfect degree of efficiency of Forza Motorsport 2. I won't ask that of I do ask it of developers, but I might understand it if they cannot do that, because I don't know what they did with Forza Motorsport 2, but it feels natural. It's the only game in which I have felt that other human racers on the hardest difficulty, they feel natural, completely natural. Expert racers, but human-like. I don't know how they designed the artificial intelligence of that game, but it's absolute perfection. Forza Motorsport 2. If you cannot do that, crank up the rubber banding. Because for players that don't like that, they will always have the versatility, the choice of, instead of Mod Nation Racers designs this solution perfectly designs this solution. Mod Nation Racers, I think, is even more efficient than Sonic All-Star Racing Transformed and Mario Kart Double Dash. In Mod Nation Racers, even on the PS Vita, even the PS Vita game, the PS3 entry, the PSP entry, and the PS Vita entry, they all share this. Besides, it's like Little Big Planet. You get custom tracks from the community. It's like Mario Maker. You get custom tracks by the community. That's why Mod Nation Racers should definitely be more praised nowadays. In Mod Nation Racers, if you select hard difficulty, you have 3 difficulties: easy, normal, and hard. Classic scheme, nothing crazy. Easy and normal, they are kind of like, you feel like you're playing against an artificial intelligence. On hard difficulty, only if you select hard difficulty, the rubber banding will be extreme, and you will have a constant competition with the artificial intelligence. The catch-on will be permanent, it will be constant, they will catch up to you constantly. You won't be able to get an advantage regardless of what you do. It's perfectly executed to have an extremely competitive race. Arguably, I would say that that's even more efficient than online multiplayer. Arguably, I would say it's a step above online multiplayer. A step above it. Why? Because it retains competitiveness. Have you seen in a lot of... if you played any multiplayer game, you'll know... You must have noticed, regardless if it's a MOBA, a Call of Duty FPS, or whatever, any competitive online game, RTS, I don't know, any competitive, or kart racers like Mario Kart, you'll see in those that generally there's a skill gap between players, and that shows. And while you can have epic moments because you know you're racing against real people, and that triggers the kind of like the competitive genetics in human nature that don't get triggered when you play against the AI. I get your point, people, if you are defending the multiplayer portion of it. But in Mod Nation Racers, it found a formula to maintain a constant state of competition with the artificial intelligence. So I won't say that it behaves like a human, because that was only achieved by Forza Motorsport 2. You know that you're going up against a bot, but it is able to retain a constant element of competition. They will constantly catch up to you. The same goes for Scoot Race. The same goes for Sonic All Stars Racing Transformed, Mario Kart Double Dash. The competition is constant. Old school racers understood this and executed this as a failsafe, right? As a last resort. We cannot design a human-like artificial intelligence. Well, go for rubber banding, and at least like that, you are preserving the replayability potential. The replayability potential of all of your gameplay mechanics that I described at the beginning of the analysis. So why you can see, I bet you can see why I wanted to make this my second point of the analysis today. So the core gameplay mechanic and the critical flaw. Imagine what would have been of this game if the artificial intelligence was on par with the high quality of the gameplay mechanics. It would have been amazing. It would have been amazing. It has rubber banding, but it's still way too easy. Even on hard difficulty, it's way too easy. Yeah, you can have races in which you don't win 100%, but I would have cranked the artificial intelligence even more. Just like I criticize all kart racers because of this. I would copy paste the artificial intelligence of Mod Nation racers. Straight up. Normal mode, you get a normal experience. You want them to behave like normal bots? Perfect. You want a competitive experience, you want to retain the competitive experience? Hard mode, and it catches up to you constantly. In this game, there are races in which I got 20 seconds of advantage. 20 seconds of advantage. You know what I'm talking about? 20 seconds of advantage? That's crazy. It also happens in Mario Kart sometimes. It's just that you don't see the times. That's absolutely crazy. And for me, that, not only for me, for anyone who has played a myriad of kart racers, anyone who has played a myriad of kart racers will be able to identify how much offline replayability gets damaged, how much it gets degraded by this. Split Second does have a countermeasure against this, but it's not the most efficient ever. It has local split screen. In fact, that's how the modders were able to replicate and revive the online play of the game, the online portion of the game. It has LAN play and offline split screen on the same, pretty much on the same screen. That is positive, but still doesn't fix the issue. One last thing that I would have added to the solution, which is the component of Forza Motorsport 3. The seasons system. If on top of what I've said, as I've said, the best solution is Forza Motorsport 2, which is human-like artificial intelligence, black magic, I don't know how they did it. Then the proven and tested, cranked up rubber banding AI, extreme rubber banding of the artificial intelligence, the most common solution that 99% of amazing racing games have. There's a third element that could potentially complement the other two, because those two are part of the artificial intelligence. Now let's talk about the solution that comes from the level design, and I'll include it in the gameplay category of the analysis, still kind of like a relationship, because it influences the artificial intelligence, as I've said. There's a third. It influences the replayability. Pretty much. I would have added the season system of Forza Motorsport 3, the seasonal system in all games, or the tournament mode of Mario Kart, because that, as a component of randomization to the gameplay mechanics, I would add kind of like a rogue-like component to it, like kind of like the tournament mode gets random tracks and you cannot tell which ones they are, and you get random tracks on a season that keeps the score. That, combined with what I said, with an efficient artificial intelligence, would be an even more effective solution than multiplayer. Even more effective than multiplayer. The thing is that all of this is difficult to design, and nowadays, simply, I cannot think of any developer who could come up with something like this. But well, that roguelike element would add is proof of what could be done with the genre, and that multiplayer isn't always a solution. Now, let's address what I've been saying. The multiplayer. You have been telling me for several minutes, probably if you're still watching my intrinsic and highly complex abstract analysis, you have been probably thinking, yeah, but I've solved that through multiplayer. I solved that through multiplayer. That has a myriad of problems. One, the servers go down, as I've said, and it can be years until the community revives them, even if that happens at all. And second, as I've said, the skill gap in kart racers can potentially create precisely the solution, the situation that we were trying to evade at the beginning. People, the stagnation of the pure weaponry system, of the pure weaponry, of the pure racing mechanics. Of the pure racing mechanics that could give an advantage to the one who's in first place and get away pretty much with it, because potentially you won't have the blue shell. So I've seen, as I've said, I've seen a multiplayer race, and the stagnation was real in split second in a multiplayer race. For example, there was, I think, only a single comeback in kind of like 3 laps around the track. That tells you that multiplayer isn't the definitive solution for split second or any other game. Let's get into the third element of the gameplay mechanics once we've addressed the core brilliant ideas that the game has and the critical flaw that I have mentioned. Let's get into the third element. Which is also part of the gameplay, but it's related to the technical category of the analysis. You'll see that this is extremely positive, that the degree of efficiency in terms of the integration of the different elements within the gameplay mechanics, it's quite high. It's a high degree of efficiency. And you'll see it once we get into this third element. Not only the level design is fused, the environmental hazards are fused with the economic system of the game, and as a direct consequence, the gameplay mechanics through the power play system. Not only that, it also has an integration of the graphical effects with the gameplay mechanics. Quite interesting, but I highlighted it during the analysis. Have you noticed that when you trigger a power play in this game, it's not only the danger of crashing because of the activation of the hazard itself, of the power play itself. Not only that, the graphical effects on the screen, the amount of dust, for example, the explosions, the sparks, for example, it has a lot of graphical effects that contribute to lower the abstract efficiency of the defensive portion of the gameplay mechanics, which is the third element that I wanted to get into. The defensive portion of the gameplay mechanics. As I always say, people, in a lot of games, 50% of the gameplay is the offensive portion of it, like we said in Sacred 2, and the comparison with Diablo, for example, that in Diablo 3, for example, you can kill mobs faster than the amount of time required to design a defensive system around the gameplay mechanics. You can kill mobs so fast in Diablo 3 that a defensive system is not needed, and thus that eliminates 50% of the gameplay mechanics. They get ignored and never exist in that gameplay loop. That's why Secret 2 was so efficient at solving this problem, because you have a defensive system in place with the evasion and everything. In the case of kart racers, let's take the most prominent example that we have all played, Mario Kart. How is the defensive system of Mario Kart implemented, and then how Split Second solves that issue? In Mario Kart, you have the 3 rotating green shells that you can get, and if you don't use them offensively, they protect your kart. You also have the 3 bananas, for example, that you can keep, and those will defend you against all power-ups except for the blue shell that we've already addressed at the beginning of the analysis. So there is a defensive system in place for the through the use of the power-ups. Now, how does this compare to Split Second's defensive system? Split Second doesn't have physical power-ups, as we said in the first component of the gameplay category of the analysis, but it solves that lack of a defensive system through the pure racing mechanics. Yes, not only the pure racing mechanics constitute the economic system of the gameplay mechanics, but they also represent the defensive portion of it. They have the pure racing mechanics in Split Second have a two-dimensional purpose, right? In Mario Kart, the pure racing mechanics, learning the drifts, learning the corners, and driving properly, doesn't have that degree of efficiency in terms of influencing the defensive system of the game. Why? Because the crashing element inherited from Burnout is not present. See how important it is. That increases the predominance of the pure racing mechanics in Split Second when compared to Mario Kart. See how interesting this phenomenon is. See how metaphysically objective the reason why the gameplay loop in a Split Second it's so fast-paced and efficient at creating a psychological sense of progression on the player's mind. See how interesting it is. The crashing mechanic from Burnout ensures that the pure racing mechanics of the gameplay are exponentially enhanced, because you cannot crash in Mario Kart. You cannot crash in Sonic All-Stars Racing Transformed. Crashing is not a gameplay element because of the fact, due to the fact that crashing is a gameplay element in Split Second. It directly exponentially enhances the predominance of the pure racing portion of the gameplay mechanics. It's absolutely magnificent. It's fascinating to look at. Just like I praised the power play system offensively, I have to praise it defensively, because the integration of the pure racing skills is much more efficient because of this. Because evading a power play, it's entirely dependent on your proficiency with the pure racing skills of the game, not the defensive power-up system of Mario Kart. You don't have bananas, you don't have the green shells rotating around you, you don't have the immunity of scars, for example, you don't have the baseball hand of Sonic All-Stars Racing Transformed. You don't have any of those. You rely 100% on your pure racing skills. Direct consequence of that, because they are directly enhanced. The pure racing skill system is directly enhanced by the crash mechanic inherited from Burnout, and that has the direct consequence. As a whole, all of that has the direct consequence of exponentially enhancing the abstract complexity of the gameplay mechanics themselves. Yes, it directly increases the abstract complexity of it. Why? Because first, you don't have a visual physical evidence of having a protection and simply not worrying about it. In Mario Kart, in all of those races, you have a visual evidence of your protection. You can see the globe in the baseball globe in Sonic All-Star Racing Transform. You can see the rotating shells, and you know that has a direct, warranted protection against most weapons, except for the blue shell, of course. In Split Second, you don't have a visual evidence of your protection, and there's a concept of timing of the power plays. There's a concept of timing your power plays that adds an element of being unpredictable. Split Second is unpredictable. It's absolutely unpredictable because it's much easier to get crashed under those rocks that I mentioned, to be affected by a power play, not because of the power play itself, because of the properties of it, because it is predictable, because you don't have a direct power-up going for you like the blue shell, but because there's no visual evidence of what's gonna happen in the first lap of any racing Split Second, and there's a sense of time, like you're racing and the crane activates and it hits you without being 100% of efficiency, because that's where the component of time comes into play. The degree of efficiency of the power play system in Split Second is directly related to the timing, to when the other player triggers the power play. When the player triggers the power play, according to your physical position in the track, there are some power plays that will be unavoidable and some that will be avoidable. Most of the time they will be avoidable, but you rely on your reflexes. There's a component of time. There's a component of time, of timing your dodges, of timing your drifting, of measuring the space-time relationship of when you are racing. Something that I don't see as predominant in Mario Kart, because, for example, you leave a static weapon, power-up like the banana or something like that. Here, you are pretty much looking at the environment, wondering where the hit will come from. Pretty much, you can memorize them. You can memorize the locations, but still, there are some that you won't be able to avoid, because when they get triggered, your car drifts involuntarily without you doing so, and your pure racing skills will be the only line of defense between you drifting with your car and not crashing. There's this difference between being attacked by a power play and crashing. There's a difference between the punishment, the economic punishment system of the gameplay mechanics, and being successfully attacked by another player. In Mario Kart, you activate the power-up, you hit the other player with the green shell, for example, or the red shell, in that case, with the red shell. That is a warranted hit, and if the player doesn't have a protection, it gets to the player. There's an immediate reward punishment system implemented. It's direct. In Split Second, there's a dissociation between the activation of a power play and the economic punishment behind it, and the economic punishment of crashing and respawning. There's a dissociation, and that dissociation, which involves the space-time relationship, which is avoiding the power play, which has a higher degree of probability of evasion, that is the core of the dynamism of the gameplay in Split Second. It's not the offensive portion that I named at the beginning. The offensive portion is pretty much the base of the adrenaline rush of the game. But this dynamism is the dynamism of the defensive system of the game, of drifting and getting control of the car, is the key psychological element that will ensure that the player gets an amazing sense of progression. That's undeniable. The game has a perfect sense of progression when you are racing, because of the defensive system of the game, not because of the offensive system. The game feels much better when evading the power plays, I would dare to say, than when you are triggering them, which still feels amazing, because you feel in control and you feel that you are controlling the level design of the game, which is quite unusual. So it's perfectly executed, but the most, well, they both play a role, but the most fascinating one is the defensive system, because pretty much it has that dissociation between the economic punishment of crashing and respawning and getting the power up, and grinding and getting the power up. In this case, the power play instead of a power up. There's a dissociation, and that opens up a lot of variety. So we have already analyzed the offensive system, which is the base of the gameplay mechanics. Then the critical flaw. It's not a slight flaw, it's a critical flaw, the artificial intelligence, with all of its implicacies. And the defensive system. The defensive system is also another great achievement of this game. It's also a great achievement of this game that I would love to see again. But pretty much, as you can see, people, that's the key. You get a sense of control that you don't get in Mario Kart. Blue shell, that's it. Red shell, that's it if you don't have a defense. Pretty much it feels like in Mario Kart it's predefined, and here there's a gap, there's a temporal gap, and which is related to the physical handling of the car, that opens up the possibility of evading them. And it's absolutely amazing. It's absolutely amazing because it's not just that the power plays will be, for example, the crane trying to kill you. That, for example, that one it doesn't cause drifting directly, but others, like exploding, like the bomb dropped by the helicopter, will cause that drifting. And if, as a direct consequence of that drifting, you end up crashing, it, at the end of the day, it had the same effect. So that forced drifting is pretty much the key to assemble all of these perfect economics, all of this defensive system of the gameplay mechanics. So another great achievement that this game does, and as you can see, the core gameplay loop is successfully achieved. It's successfully achieved. What I was mentioning about the graphics, the influence of the graphical effects on the gameplay mechanics, we'll cite it as the fourth element. It was going to be the third one, but the defensive system is more important. So the fourth element, the influence of the graphical effects on the gameplay mechanics, pretty much as I said, the dust, the sparks, there are a lot of elements, of graphical effects that are perfectly integrated into the gameplay mechanics. Let's get to a very specific power-up of Mario Kart to establish a direct comparison. The squid ink of Mario Kart, in which the squid pretty much ensures that your screen is full of ink, and as a direct consequence of that, you partially cannot see. And you rely on your pure racing. That's pretty much the power-up that makes Split Second and Mario Kart the most similar. It's the power-up that makes them the most similar, pretty much. The squid of Mario Kart, and you'll see why. Because in Split Second, the squid power-up is kind of like included by default in all power plays. In all power plays is fourth element of the gameplay mechanics. The influence of the graphical effects on the gameplay. It's pretty much incorporated in all power-ups that you trigger throughout the game. Pretty much all of them. 100%. So the squid ink of Mario Kart in this game is translated, as I've said, as dust, sparks, explosions, everything. There are a lot of elements that and that's it's extremely interesting because this graphical effect plays a vital role because it's related to, once again, the crash mechanic inherited by Burnout. In Mario Kart you cannot crash, but in split second, if the front of your car hits a wall, you respawn. That's basically the idea, you get wrecked. The squid mechanic, blocking the visual range, this is fascinating, blocking the visual range of the player plays a vital role. Why? Because this mechanic, it's exponentially enhanced by the fact that the main way of losing of efficiency of the weaponry system in split second, it's respawning due to a crash. And you cannot crash if you can effectively use the defensive system of the game, and even if you are drifting, you can stabilize the car after some seconds. The key here is that generally when you trigger a power play, see how many layers of abstract complexity the gameplay mechanics have. It's not only that you will partially lose control of your car with the drifting for some seconds, but also that your visual range will be blocked when a power play is triggered through dust, through sparks and everything. So the combination of the previous element that I mentioned, the defensive system of the game, drifting but being able to stabilize the car, then has another difficulty, the visual range of the player, and that gets combined with the level 2 power plays because you can change the level design of the track, and like that you get you can have a cloud of dust kind of like completely blocking your vision. There are moments in this game in which the screen goes completely dark or brown because of the dust, because of the cloud of dust, and there are specific fractions of seconds in which you cannot see anything at all, and that second lasts long enough as for you to crash, and then precisely the power play economic system of the game comes into play, and the crash mechanic inherited from Burnout activates, and you respawn, and pretty much the game completes its gameplay loop. But see how many layers had to be assembled of abstract complexity of the gameplay mechanics. See how many layers of that had to be assembled just to get the gameplay loop that is so good in split second. Pretty much. So you lose control of your car, but it's not only that. You drift, but you cannot see anything. You cannot see a thing. And because of that, you crash, and that is activated. Good, people. Good. As I've said, it's absolutely incredible. It's a weird relationship to see an integration of the graphical effects within the gameplay mechanics. That should be used more. And pretty much, as I said, the squid power-up of Mario Kart is constantly integrated within the gameplay mechanics of this game. It's absolutely amazing. Pretty much, it exponentially enhances the abstract complexity of that defensive system that I cited some minutes ago, and it's always important to address the high efficiency in terms of the degree of integration of the elements of within the gameplay mechanics, which is the main thing that makes a gameplay loop efficient. So in that sense, it's a perfect loop, it's a perfect gameplay loop because of that high degree of efficiency of the integration of the gameplay mechanics that I have been mentioning. Critical flaw, as I've said, the biggest sin of all card racer, of most card racers. It is absolutely sad that Split Second doesn't have a higher difficulty. It's absolutely sad in the offline portion, and that it doesn't have a randomized element, like kind of like a tournament or season mode in which you get randomized races. That would be the perfect solution. With a good AI, this game would have been absolutely perfect. But well, pretty much I think we've covered all of the gameplay mechanics. The shortcuts, well, pretty much. The gameplay mechanics change according to the level design, but we'll get into that in a moment because that's more predominantly part of the level design. With the different game modes, we'll get into that in a minute. There are some variations, but pretty much as a highlight, the knockout race, the elimination race, is the one that has the highest degree of influence in terms of making the gameplay element more predominant. Like in elimination races, it's pretty much knockout races. Like every 10 seconds, the last racer gets eliminated, and because of that rubber banding, it has been the source of most of my defeats in terms of playing the game. So in terms of the knockout race, that has the highest degree of influence of the gameplay mechanics, because it only takes a second for the vultures that are in second place to get ahead of you just for 1 second and pretty much lose the race. It happened to me several times. It's a trick that is the closest to replicating a perfect rubber banding artificial intelligence that the game has going. Alright, pretty much those 4 elements. The gameplay mechanics, I think we did a pretty comprehensive analysis of it. I covered all of the gameplay loop. There's only one last element that I wanted to highlight, pretty much the stat system of the game. The 5th element, the stat system of the game. How could I possibly forget about it? I'm not gonna forget about it. The stat system of the game ensures that an extra layer of abstract complexity is added to it. If I'm honest with you, I've seen in the online race that I saw that everyone used the same car, so the variety is not properly executed. Even so, because in Mario Kart, in that sense, Mario Kart is pretty good. I know that you will tell me, well, everyone gets a bike or something like that. Yeah, but even so, there's a pretty healthy degree of variation in Mario Kart in terms of the stat system of the game. In Split Second, you get cars. You pretty much have the stats, pretty basic stats that you find in lots of kart racers. But for example, speed, acceleration, strength, and drifting. Pretty much, I think I'm not forgetting any. The drifting is pretty much similar to how Mario Kart operates in that sense. That you won't simply the better you're drifting, the more control you have over the car. It's pretty much the handling instead of drifting. It's the handling system of the game. Then speed, your maximum speed, that helps according to the track. In some tracks you'll want to have more speed. In others you will want to have better handling. Posh naming convention of this game. Drifting, pretty much. And as I've said, the acceleration, pretty much how fast you can recover, how much you can achieve that maximum speed. So pretty much, people, in terms of the stat system of the game, it's pretty well designed, because I have only seen one perfect car, and even so, the car that I deemed as perfect for my playthrough is not the one used in multiplayer, because drifting, the handling is favored over the maximum speed and acceleration. But I would say that there is that there is a stat system implemented pretty decent. There's a pretty decent stat system implemented to it. They could have gone for something worse, like not including a stat system at all. And pretty much the strength, for example, is the one stat that takes away the show. because it ensures to give you the variety. Strength pretty much ensures that you don't get killed if you get hit by partially some of the power-ups. Pretty much it ensures that you don't get wrecked as soon as you get hit by some power-ups, and you don't lose a lot of drifting when you're hit by them. In that sense, Scars did something similar, that you don't get hit so severely. The drifting is not that bad the more strength you have. So it's absolutely amazing. It's absolutely amazing. It's absolutely amazing. The strength is pretty well implemented. You can have 10 bars of each stat, and no car is perfect. For example, you don't have the equivalent of the Panther in Scars that is perfect. In that sense, it allows the player to experiment, and it encourages the player to try out different cars. So the stat system, everything in terms of the gameplay mechanics, the handling of the car would be the sixth element, the handling of the car. In that sense, it's pretty similar to Ridge Racer rather than Burnout, but Burnout, according to the entry, can have similar handling, but I would say that it's more similar to Ridge Racer in that sense, especially the one Ridge Racer Unbounded, which was a pretty late entry from 2012, made by Backbeer, which were the developers of Flatout actually. So it's actually the system of Flatout, but with a more arcade racing feel that feels quite similar to this one. In the case of Blur, the cars feel much heavier in that sense. In that sense, Blur does have since it was developed by Bizarre Creations, which were the developers of Project Gotham Racing and Metropolis Street Racer series. In that sense, they feel more like real cars in that sense. So Split Second, it goes more for an arcade feel. Not that Blur it's a simulation, but in terms of the degree of predominance, it gets closer to that. But Split Second still, with its arcade feel, it still feels. You can feel the handling of the cars are not licensed, but they are still. You can still feel the handling of a real car. As I've said, pretty accurate to describe it as similar to Ridge Racer Unbounded, because the drifting pretty much has that. The drifting has pretty much that back train feeling, like it's kind of like the axis, the main gravitational axis of the drifting is in the back of the car rather than the front. Like it feels like that, and that's pretty much Ridge Racer. And in Ridge Racer Unbounded from 2012, it feels quite similar. Or well, Ridge Racer Unbounded feels like Split Second, because that entry was released 2 years later. Alright, I think we've addressed all of the gameplay mechanics. 2 hours. You know that it's the main category of the analysis that we always need to get into. And the conclusion is pretty much that it's a mixed bag, because the gameplay loop is perfectly executed because of the abstract complexity that I've said, but the artificial intelligence leaves much to be desired, because even if it doesn't get the perfect solution of Forza Motorsport, the huge flaw, it's not a slight flaw, it's a critical flaw that in terms of the gameplay mechanics, the artificial intelligence doesn't go for the proven and tested formula of as I've said, of Mod Nation racers, of having rubber banding for the extreme rubber banding for the artificial intelligence. As I've said, Mod Nation racers, I think it's the best example of properly implementing a hard artificial intelligence with rubber banding. Forza Horizon, but in terms of kart racers, is another example, Forza Horizon, of this, of a cranked up rubber banding artificial intelligence. But Mod Nation Racers is the perfect example. Mario Kart Double Dash and Sonic All-Stars Racing Transformed has a pretty interesting element that once you get gold, you can get platinum. You get platinum difficulty, and there it gets quite brutal. Platinum difficulty. That's where the the rubber banding becomes really, really similar to Mod Nation Racers. It never gets to the perfection of, as I've said, of Forza Motorsport 2, in which I don't know how they did it, but the racers feel natural, feel human. So if we accept the fact that they are bots, go for the rubber banding artificial intelligence, because that preserves, as I've said, the replayability of the gameplay mechanics. And I think that's pretty much more important. That is objectively more important than just trying to solve it through the multiplayer portion of the gameplay mechanics. Pretty much. Let's get into the second element in this. Regarding this, let's get into the second category of the analysis with these 5-6 elements of the gameplay. I think I went a bit overboard, but well, I love doing this. So pretty much I get lost in thought, and I keep adding the elements. But I think that I covered all of the gameplay elements of the game in these 2 hours. Alright, let's get into the technical category of the analysis, people. In that sense, this is a strong point. I will highlight this as the strong point. Is not a mixed bag like the gameplay mechanics because of that critical flaw of the artificial intelligence. The technical aspect of it, I have no complaints. The integration of the graphical effects, it's absolutely perfect, incredible, majestic. The graphical effects are amazing, from the bloom sources to the sky to how the buildings explode. You have the instant replay mechanic in which you can appreciate all of that. The particle effects, the density of the particle effects are amazing. The hitboxes of the physics system of the game were pretty difficult to get right. They're a crowning achievement of this game. The physics and the accurate hitboxes of the cars, that's extremely difficult to implement, even more back in 2010. As the main as the flaw that we could highlight is that the original release, it works at 30 FPS, but as I've said, if you get the Civer edition that I have been commenting so much about, you can get that frame rate up to 60 FPS with the physics 100% accurate, so you can appreciate the accurate hitboxes that the developers originally developed for the game, running at 30 FPS. So I played the game at 60 FPS thanks to the Civer edition on PC, which I would highly recommend. It also gets you the DLC cars and the Quarry DLC tracks, which are 2 more. And pretty much the technical aspect of the game is impeccable. When I say impeccable, it's a 10 out of 10. The only thing that we could say, that we could ask for, it's 144 refresh rate, pretty much unlocked refresh rates, because it has unlocked resolutions. I played the game at 2K and it works, and I'm sure it works at 4K. So it has unlocked resolutions, but the frame rate was originally capped at 30 FPS. Fortunately, with the Civer edition, you can get 60 FPS with accurate physics and hitboxes, which were extremely difficult to achieve. I would say that the physics system of the game is the crowning achievement, with pretty accurate hitboxes. When playing the Civer edition at 60 FPS, it runs smoothly, and it's absolutely gorgeous. It's absolutely gorgeous to look at this game. The bloom, it's amazing. It's absolutely beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful to look at this game. It's gorgeous, and it's hypnotizing, with the graphical effects on the screen that have a relationship with the gameplay mechanics, the explosions, the sparks, the density of the particle effects, everything in this game that I say about the technical aspect of it. It feels like a modern game. It looks better than modern games made with Unreal Engine 4. This one, because of the special effects density, this game with the ultra textures on PC, it looks absolutely amazing. And if you don't have that impression in your, if you haven't watched my my gameplay, and you notice that there's a huge difference between my gameplay and what you were and your memory of when you originally played the game, in case you played it. There's a reason behind that, which is the thing that I mentioned, basically the reason that I mentioned when I did the Ultimate PS Vita showcase. The pixel per inch density, people. Originally, this game was mostly played. The PC port wasn't that good when it was originally released. With the Civer edition, it gets updated and it gets better. But pretty much the PS3 and the Xbox 360 versions of this game, because of the pixel per inch density, because of the distance of the quality of details that you got on those consoles originally, because when it was quite common back in the day that TV screens were smaller, and the distance between the couch that you were probably playing the game from and the screen was much more. Here, if you play the game on a monitor, with a monitor, sorry, kind of like close to it, as we play most PC games, instead of a couch, and playing it on Ultra with the Civer edition, with the updates and everything on PC, with the game properly being played properly, with the correct pixel per inch density and distance from your screen, if you do that, you'll realize that the game is gorgeous, that the textures are like in a modern game, that the graphical effects are incredible, and that there's a huge difference between the Civer edition that I have been showcasing and what you originally played on the Xbox 360 or the PS3. It makes also a pretty good use of the vignetting effect, which tries to simulate a camera. For example, you have the watermark of a split second in the top right corner, because the game, that's in terms of the Grandeur category of the analysis, it replicates a reality TV show, and it has the effect of the camera. Around it, the user interface is amazingly designed. This was mentioned by another viewer of the channel, and I also thought that it was the case, pretty much. The fact that you have the user interface centered right behind your car, as floating the power play bars, and the different pure racing elements that fill the power play are also displayed there. For example, close call, and close call appears there inside of the power play meter, and the drifting and the drafting and everything. The user interface is perfect in that sense. It has one flaw. It's not 100%. It's not perfect, sorry, but for the most part, it ensures that all of the UI elements are centered in the main field of, in the range of the central field of vision of the player. They're in the central portion of the screen, and like that, the player doesn't have to kind of like look at different parts. It doesn't have to focus the vision there. That's an amazing solution. It's also animated. It's an amazing solution that Mario Kart should definitely implement. With the power plays, can you imagine the power plays being kind of like a bit smaller, but right behind the player? That would be absolutely amazing. Right behind the physical card. I think it's the most efficient user interface solution I've seen. Negative aspect of it, it doesn't have a speedometer, it doesn't have a minimap. The minimap could arguably be intentionally removed, and it would be acceptable, because the power plays have that feeling of a space, and with a minimap you would take away that. So the minimap, having a rotating minimap, an animated minimap, could arguably be a design choice that should be respected. The minimap can be. The speedometer shouldn't. No, it shouldn't be. The speedometer should have been included. The speedometer could have been included, kind of like even below. It doesn't need to be kind of like the traditional speedometer at the bottom right corner of the screen. Even below the central user interface, in the central vision range of the player, right behind the car, a speedometer, a small speedometer, would have made would have been wonderful, wonderful for this game. It would have helped with, for example, the timed detonator racers, the time attack mode of the game. It would have definitely helped with that, because sometimes you are unable to properly measure the speed of your car. You have to pay attention to the sound of the engine. I know that I remember that the developers back in the day mentioned that that element was removed, so it truly felt like a reality TV show in which the car was being filmed right from behind, from a helicopter or something. So in that sense, I can understand that it has a portion of artistic choice for the minimap, but the speedometer still plays a big role. I think the speedometer should always be included. I hate it. I love that Mario Kart Double Dash has a speedometer. I hated it when Mario Kart 7 didn't have a speedometer, and also Mario Kart Wii, I think it doesn't have it. And pretty much CTGP solves that. That's a mod for the Nintendo 3DS for Mario Kart 7 that precisely adds the speedometer. That's the thing, people. That's the thing. The speedometer should always be included. If they wanted to include it in the central range of vision of a player, of the user interface, just like the power play, well, that would have been a logical solution. A logical solution that would have been amazing. That would have been even more amazing, because, as I've said, having the user interface centered does is a pretty efficient way. It does contribute to solve the problem of having the user interface at the corners of the screen. Definitely, it helps with that. So it would have been exponentially enhanced if they would have included the speedometer there. Alright, as for the rest, it's impeccable. The visual presentation of the game is impeccable. The textures are have a high resolution. Pretty much the accuracy of the hitboxes of the physics engine is a crowning achievement, and they did it, so kudos to them. The technical aspect of the game, except for the lack of a speedometer, I won't criticize it at all. The bloom effect is perfect, everything is perfect. The car engine sounds amazing. It doesn't have licensed cars, but that I cannot ask that of the game. That's extremely expensive, pretty much, to implement, and pretty much the technical aspect of it, it's absolutely amazing. Even the PSP version of the game is well executed. The explosions, the crashes, everything, the filters of the game has kind of like an orange filter that contributes to this as well, and it's absolutely amazing. It's absolutely amazing, and the technical aspect of it, it's absolutely impeccable, especially at 60 FPS. Alright, let's get into the level design category of the analysis. Which is precisely the one that will enhance the gameplay mechanics. It will enhance the gameplay mechanics, people. Why? Because this game, contrary to Mario Kart, adds a lot of level design variety. It adds a lot of level design variety. You'll see it in a moment. You get 10 tracks normally, 12 if you pay attention to what I've been saying, and get the Civer edition, 12 tracks. You get 12 tracks, but inside of those tracks you have the variations created by the level 2 power plays of the gameplay system of the game. So the integration of the gameplay mechanics with the level design also benefits the level design category of the analysis in this case, because the tracks fundamentally change, and as a direct consequence of that, it's 12 tracks. You get 12 tracks, but the direct consequence of that is that the variations within them will be even more. Another clear example of how perfectly integrated the gameplay mechanics are with the level design. So you get 12 tracks, with the Quarry DLC that I mentioned that you get with the Civer edition. Not only that, I recommend it because you get 60 FPS and the corrected physics for the hitboxes. But not only that, you get 12 tracks, but the game modes. The game modes are the main strong point of the level design of Split Second. Let's get over each one of them one by one. The traditional race that we have been mentioning, the traditional race, pretty much the main multiplayer mode of the game. The typical 3-lap races that you will stumble upon in Mario Kart, Sonic All-Stars Racing Transformed, F1 All-Stars, Little Big Planet Karting, Mod Nation Racers, etc, etc, etc. All the classic kart racers, pretty much. So, classic race. Then you have Time Attack, which is actually called Detonator in this game, and the influence of the gameplay mechanics on the level design are exponentially enhanced here in the Detonator. Detonator pretty much involves completing one lap without any other opponents, but with all of the power plays triggering automatically. This is brilliant in terms of the design of the campaign, which we'll get to in a minute. Why? Because it teaches the player the locations of the power plays even before getting into a real race. So the player at least has a kind of like a test race, like we would normally get in a real F1 race or a normal NASCAR race or something like that, in which real pilots get kind of like several test laps to properly adjust the car to the track and everything, with also tweaks and everything, and so they memorize the turns and everything. In this game, it's incredible how the gameplay mechanics, the power play system, adds an extra layer of complexity, because you not only have to memorize the terrain, and remember, we don't have a minimap in this game as part of the user interface, but the main idea is to memorize, to learn by heart the locations of the power plays, to add abstract complexity to the level design. Because, as I've said, the defensive system of the gameplay mechanics is directly linked to evading the activation of the power plays, and there's a forced drifting mechanic involved in it, like you lose control of the car for some seconds. And not only that, there's the integration of the graphical effects. You get a cloud of dust that will block your range of vision for some seconds, and as you can see, the combination of the abstract complexity of the layers of the abstract complexity of the gameplay mechanics that stack on top of each other influences the level design of the game. Because, down-to-earth examples, just so we don't just get the theory, the cloud of dust blocks your vision of the player, the drifting comes into play, you partially lose control of the car, and that combination ensures that it will trigger the crash mechanic inherited from Burnout. So, as you can see, it's a unique combination that is further influenced by the level design. The level design will add a fourth layer, because the crash mechanic would be the third. It adds a fourth layer of complexity. Why? Because it's not the same. The difficulty derived from the game mode is not the same in a normal race than an elimination race or a time attack. An elimination race is a knockout race in which every 20 seconds, except for the first time, which is 40 seconds, every 20 seconds, the last racer gets eliminated. The classic knockout race from Need for Speed. Or in this case, it's called elimination. It's the same. A classic mode from arcade racers. So let's pay attention to how the power play mechanic influences a normal 3-lap race and compare it to the knockout race. If you've been watching my gameplays, people, it's only 3 days, the campaign didn't last that much. If you've been paying attention, you will see that the difficulty of the gameplay mechanics, the difficulty of the highest spike of the learning curve, the highest spike, the biggest spike of the learning curve, it's concentrated in the elimination races and the time attack races, because you cannot choose that your car, so you don't have an influence of the stat system there. But let's go back to the elimination races, to that game mode. If you have been paying attention, you'll notice that most 3-lap races are easier to complete, and it's easier to get the advantage and control the outcome of those races. But in the case of elimination races, the non-perfect rubber banding of the artificial intelligence, the flawed design of the artificial intelligence, in which the rubber banding isn't strong enough, even with all of those flaws that I mentioned, even with a defective artificial intelligence, even with that, thanks to the level design influence of the elimination race, the difficulty gets higher and it achieves what it should originally have achieved in a normal race. Oh, pretty weird case. But yes, I felt the same sensation, the same feeling as I usually get from Mod Nation racers, that perfect degree of efficiency of the artificial intelligence, of being cranked up to the maximum in elimination races. Why? Because it happened to me a lot of times in split second, in which I was first for a long time. I was dominating the race, I had a clear advantage, but it only took 1 second, the last second, pretty much the last 3-4 seconds of the elimination race, in which there's only me and the racer behind me, the one that survived all of the elimination process. It only took some very few seconds, 3 to 4 seconds, for that racer to pass me, and I get eliminated. As a direct consequence of the level design, of the influence of the level design on the gameplay mechanics. In a normal race, that would have never happened, unless you are at the end of the race, and you can block the cars if you kind of like watch behind you, which you can do. But in the elimination races, the elimination mode, the knockout races, as I said, every 10 seconds, the last racer gets eliminated. When you narrow it down to you against one more pilot, the rubber banding does come into effect pretty efficiently, and if you don't know how to block that racer, you lose that race. Pretty much because you get immediately eliminated. Quite an interesting phenomenon we can see there, that, as I've said, it's incredible how the level design fixes a flaw. It fixed in my walkthrough a flaw that is still prevalent in the normal race mode. Not only that, the game does have other elements of the level design. For example, then you have the not the detonator, the fights again, the helicopter races, in which you have to avoid the helicopter missiles, which are kind of like spots on the ground, and when they turn red, the missiles are launched, and you can survive one. You don't get the perfect wave bonus if you get hit, but pretty much, and you have to combo the multiplayer doing perfect evasions of those. In that sense, the normal helicopter races are pretty much just evading. They're pretty much just evading, and then you have the revenge mode, which expands upon that, and basically involves evading, building up the power meter, which is, I think, the best mode, pretty much the most creative mode, one of the most creative modes of the game, in which it you build up the power meter and you activate your level 2 power play, and you deflect the missiles back to the helicopter until it's destroyed. It has 10 bars, and you pretty much deal for, I think it's for 12 bars, and you deal 4 points of 4 damage per reflection, per deflected wave. So you only need 3 waves. You can also build up your drifting, and that will contribute to the power play meter, and like that you can get to the highest degree of efficiency and of building up the power meter, and like that's how you come in first play in those revenge races. I think that revenge mode has a lot of creativity going on for it, and it definitely enhances replayability a lot. So you have revenge mode. You also have the survival mode. You have the survival mode, which is pretty much and you have to, one thing about the revenge mode against the helicopter, you have to keep up the combo. You have to keep up the combo, and the waves get progressively harder. And if you slow down way too much, you have no way of avoiding the missiles because they move. A quite complex system in that sense, how they designed the detonator, the revenge mode of the game. Because if you slow down way too much, you don't. The missiles kind of like move, and they'll. And it's impossible to avoid them. And even if you have a car with high strength, you'll get wrecked. So in that sense, good integration of the stat system, because the strength will play a role, the strength stat, within the level design there, because the missiles won't kill you so fast. The same goes for the other mode that I was going to comment, which is the survival mode, in which you have to simply avoid the barrels. They turn from blue to red. The blue ones slow you down, the red ones wreck you, and pretty much you have to pass by tracks that are unloading those explosive barrels. You race with some other cars that you use you have to use as mid shells. Some waves are pretty difficult to avoid because, as I've said, the forced drifting ensures that you briefly lose control of the car, and generally, if you get hit by a blue barrel, then the red one will kind of like ensure that you are wrecked. If you also slow down way too much and you're way too slow, you won't be able to pass the tracks, and a second wave of barrels will trigger. There's a fixed amount of time between one wave of barrels being unloaded and the next one, so it perfectly measures the efficiency of the player at learning the defensive system of the game. Just like the time attack mode, the detonator ensures that you know the power play locations. This one ensures that even if you are hit, you learn how to overcome that crisis of being forced of having forced a short brief period of forced drifting with your car. Quite amazing how they all intertwine all of the gameplay elements in that sense. There's one last mode, which is a combination of revenge and which is attacking the helicopter, and the knockout race, which is exclusive to the console DLCs, pretty much the Xbox 360 and the PS3. That's why I would highly recommend you get the Xbox 360 version of the game, even if you have the Civer edition, because you get the Onslaught mode, the exclusive Onslaught mode that wasn't ported to the PC version. And with the exclusive Onslaught mode, you get a knockout race combined with helicopter. I don't know if it was Revenge or the classic helicopter run, in which you just avoid. But pretty much the Onslaught mode, you can see it. I haven't played it. I didn't play it originally because I didn't get the DLC. The concept of DLC was extremely new back in the day. And yeah, right now I have it, but I have to play through the game on my Xbox 360 to unlock it. Pretty much to unlock the mode. You unlock the mode as you progress through the game. Okay. Another thing that I wanted to highlight is that the game would get a bit harder if you don't use the DLC cars in that sense, but I don't think that's a valid way of increasing the difficulty. Pretty much, but well, you can do it. You can play with worse cars, I guess, with a worse stat system. I guess that's the only artificial way we have to finally fix the problem of the game being way too easy in that sense. But it's not valid. It's not valid. Kind of like you are degrading your own handling of the car as a way of fixing a terrible design choice. And as a direct consequence of that, I would say that it's not a valid solution. So pretty much, I would say that those are all of the. You have 12 tracks. You have that. You have the campaign. The campaign is composed of it was 12 episodes, 6 races, each of them. So you have a healthy amount there, but they're just the races are pretty short. Some of them are just 2 laps. Some of the time attacks. Most of the time you'll spend it replaying some of the races, especially the time attack and the elimination races. Those concentrate the difficulty. I would say it's exactly 12 hours in terms of replayability. It's 12 hours, not 10. It's 12 hours. It's very exact in that sense. 12 hours, which isn't terrible for a racing game, but still, it completely destroys replayability because of what I said, because of the predominance of the multiplayer component, and I don't think it's a valid solution to do that, because, for example, even in the split-second community, the Discord, you can join it and you can play the game online on PC. Even if you do all of that, the game still doesn't you don't get a guaranteed 100% chance of finding players. For example, I've seen a lot of posts kind of like asking for making a party to play the game, even like that, and as you can see, it's not a proper solution. The player should be able to access the highest degree of complexity of the gameplay mechanics offline. If on top of that you can add multiplayer, for example, Borderlands does this perfectly as well, and a lot of other racing games, for example, all of the Forza Motorsport games, especially Forza Motorsport 2, as I've said, Gran Turismo, etc. You should be able to access the highest complexity of the gameplay mechanics offline. And then if on top of that you want the multiplayer experience of having of feeling the adrenaline of going up against real people, then on top of that you add that element. But it should be a complement, not an integral part of the original gameplay mechanics. So in that sense, the level design is still good because you get 12 hours of content. Plus, you can play if you have 2 joysticks, you can play split screen offline, which solves the problem. In that sense. So it's pretty good. I would say split screen is the saving element of the game, which is inherited precisely from Mario Kart 64 and old school Mario games like Double Dash, Mario Kart games. So in that sense, that ensures that the game has a bit more of replayability. You unlock kind of like the perfect car once you finish the campaign. You gradually increase decals and cars as you play through the game. You get a bonus race. You actually originally only play 5 races per episode, and you get 1 extra bonus race, which is the 6th one, in which you have to. It's easy. 12 hours are more than enough to get gold on every race. If I could do it, you can do it too. You can extend it a bit more if you use a non-DLC car, but I think it's not a valid reason as to say that it improves the level design of the game at all. So no, it's not valid. And pretty much that's pretty much the key of the level design. You get 12 hours of content, you have the campaign, and not much more. That's another, as I said, this is related to the critical flaw that I've been mentioning. Adding a randomized element to it would make the best game of all time. Kind of like being able to create tournaments in Mario Kart, for example, is how this flaw is addressed. The seasonal system of Forza Motorsport 3, for example, is the most efficient way of solving this. Or the other solution is the open world of Forza Horizon, for example. Or the rally mode of Forza Horizon 1 adds more variety, it adds more replayability. I think the most efficient way is open world plus randomized races, like Forza Horizon, and if you can implement a seasonal system like a tournament mode, like in Forza Motorsport 3 or Mario Kart, a tournament mode, it would have been a welcome addition. For example, in Split Second, even if none of the flaws that I have mentioned up until now, even without all of those flaws, a tournament mode would have been a saving grace, at least. It would have been kind of like a last resort element that would have added at least a bit of replayability, but you cannot even create your own tournament. In the mod, your own tournaments. In the mod, I think you can create your with the Civer edition mod, you can create your custom game modes, but it still doesn't address the flaw of creating your custom tournament. For example, in Scars, you can create your custom tournament. In Mario Kart, you can do it. And especially in Mod Nation Racers, when you play tournament, you get the perfect artificial intelligence that I have been mentioned with the cranked up rubber banding AI, and when combined with that proper element, when those two proper elements get properly combined, tournament with a decent with a much harder artificial intelligence, the combination of those two elements creates the degree of replayability that these games require to get a perfect qualification, pretty much. And Split Second fails at the efficiency of the rubber banding AI, and it fails in the level design. It's absolutely sad that these two critical flaws are countered by an incredible and innovative loop of the gameplay mechanics. So it's absolutely sad, because we would get they spent so much time designing. I get the feeling that they spent so much time designing the gameplay mechanics that they missed the mark with the replayability aspect of the game. They trusted multiplayer would solve everything, and the only non-multiplayer solution, which was local split screen, doesn't address the variety, the component of randomness of the level design that you get from a tournament mode. A tournament mode would have been a much more efficient solution. With randomized tracks, it would have been perfect. But even so, if the player can choose, player chooses 10 tracks, and then the player can spend all day. Even with the terrible artificial intelligence, it would have at least saved that. If with a good artificial intelligence, the game would have been amazing. The replayability is bare bones. And as I've said, I gave you examples. I wouldn't make this criticism without giving you examples of this issue being solved. Mod Nation Racers solved it. Little Big Planet Karting, I haven't played it, but it was developed by the same studio behind Mod Nation Racers, so it must be quite similar. I did use that one. I cannot give you a precise intel. Sonic All-Stars Racing Transformed has a lengthy campaign with a second difficulty mode and a tournament mode. Extremely efficient solution as well. And as I've said, Mario Kart Double Dash has a high... it doesn't address this, but it has a higher difficulty. So at least that flaw is partially addressed with the classic tournaments combined with the efficient artificial intelligence. But here, there's no tournament mode, no randomization, and the AI also doesn't compensate for that. Because we could have an amazing experience that is short. For example, Vanquish, it's a third-person shooter that is extremely short. It has the problem of this game. It doesn't have a lot of replayability, but the difficulty is so high, it's quite high, that it is addressed, and it has a component of hack and slash like Bayonetta, and it has a score system as well. In the case of a split second, it doesn't solve the problem of replayability. I've seen it in a lot of kart racers, and pretty much it's a terrible flaw that completely destroys the replayability potential of a split second. Let's get into the Grandeur category of the analysis, because those are the two. It's incredible to see a game that has such an efficient integration of all of the elements, but those two critical flaws, replayability and the difficulty of the artificial intelligence. It's a pretty well, not unique case. I've seen cases like this, and I have highlighted them, but not with such a solid gameplay system. Like it feels like a waste of potential, because the gameplay system is amazing, but the level design and the lack of replayability both hold it back. Grandeur, the Grandeur category of analysis, the impact of the soundtrack, story, and everything on the player. Well, in terms of the story, it's pretty lighthearted. There's not much to comment about it. Generally, racing games don't have this component, but even so, I can appreciate that the game is narrated as some kind of as a reality TV show. Though I would say that since they were blurring the line between kart racers and arcade racers, they could have gone for the solution of Need for Speed, in which they do have a story. Well, or they used to have it. They used to have it back when Need for Speed was good. For example, the original Need for Speed Most Wanted from 2005 was pretty good at this. Need for Speed Carbon was good at this. Underground 2 expanded upon the mechanics of the original Underground. But well, or at least the system of Burnout Paradise, for example, which is open world, and you always need to get to become. The idea is to become the best racer, but in that sense, Need for Speed was so successful because of that element, because of that component of creating a cohesive racing environment influenced by Fast and Furious. In that sense, I think the influence of Fast and Furious in the early 2000s was extremely positive in games. Also with Spy Hunter, for example, you can see it in some of the Spy Hunter entries, in which you can get a story. You can get a story in a racing game, and nowadays that is discarded as useless. For example, the driver series, the Midnight Club series, the last one, the one that is exclusive to the PS3, Midnight Club Los Angeles on the PS3 and the Xbox 360. Midnight Club games, which are an evolution of the Midtown Madness series from Microsoft. You can see that how they went from Midtown Madness not having a story at all to Midnight Club being so amazing, some of the best racing games of all time, because they have a story as well, not only because of the perfect racing mechanics. So Need for Speed, Midnight Club, I think that element of having a cohesive story in a racing game is kind of like frowned upon nowadays. Developers don't pay attention to that, and it's the very reason why I could never say that something like iRacing or modern entries of Gran Turismo and Forza are the best games. In the case of Forza Motorsport 2, it doesn't have a story, but the fact that it solved such a brutal issue as creating human-like AI, it compensates it. But in that sense, that's why I would say that Midnight Club Los Angeles from Rockstar it's also one of the best racing games of all time. As well, the same goes for a lot of the Need for Speed entries, even if you think that they are way too easy. For example, Need for Speed Shift is the Dark Souls of Need for Speed games. But Driver, which one was it? Driver Renegade? Driver San Francisco, sorry, that one is for the 3DS entry, Renegade. Driver San Francisco, for example, solved that, and it's absolutely sad. Even if you have the classic story of progressing through through a tournament, through a real life tournament, like in the NASCAR series or something like that, even if it's something like that, because I can understand that you cannot incorporate fantasy elements to it in normal racers, I think kart racers should have story mode. That's a critical flaw and the main reason why the genre isn't more popular. The day someone implements a kart racer with a proper story mode, with a proper integration of an open world with the gameplay mechanics, it will be as successful as Forza Horizon, mark my words. Why is Forza Horizon so successful? Why did it become the most successful racing game right now? Because it has a cohesive open world with a cohesive progression, even if the story is simplistic, with those things, and pretty much it would be even better if it would get the in-depth lore of for example Need for Speed with the duality. In that sense, that's why I love Need for Speed The Run. In that sense, that's why Need for Speed The Run inherits that element from Need for Speed Most Wanted from 2005. They took the time to create a cohesive story, and you know what's the proof of that? I know the story is a copy from a lot of traditional films, but then did you know that there's a movie about Need for Speed, and pretty much it's a clone of Need. And you know which game they picked for it? They picked Need for Speed The Run, because the story element is quite implemented. So the Grandeur category in racing games, it's always something that can be completely absent. So the fact that you at least have a minimum context, it's always good. But it's always the same. I always arrive at the same conclusion when analyzing this element in racing games. It's an absolute mess that a game from 2005, Most Wanted, was pretty much the only game that I can think about, and well, also Midnight Club, that only two series bothered to implement it. So Split Second in that sense follows the same pattern. They don't worry about that. They worry about multiplayer. It's an absolute tragedy. So they get the gameplay perfectly, and the Grandeur category, as with all racing games that I have analyzed throughout my life, the Grandeur category, it's a mine of gold that never gets exploited because of rush development, because of everything. Split Second at least gives you a context of a reality TV show, but we don't get, for example, information on the racers. For example, Vixen, Raptor, all of them, the 8 elite racers that are kind of like the other competitors of the reality TV show. There are no physical faces or human models inside of the cars or outside of them. Pretty much you don't even know. You have to imagine how they look like, and pretty much they are next to non-existent. In the case of Blur, I think they did a similar job, that you have to, it's pretty much defeat the top dog racer, and that's it. I always loved how the influence of Fast and Furious movies and on Need for Speed made it possible to kind of like have, for example, in Need for Speed Undercover, you get to be an agent, and while the game design is questionable, you still get that. Driver San Francisco, as I've said, implements that, and in that sense, it's the reason why Need for Speed is still one of the, or at least up until recently, up until EA decided to go full multiplayer, how the classic entries of Need for Speed, let's be more specific, are still the kings of being the most complete package. In terms of kart racers, they never had a story, as far as I can tell. Mario Kart, not a single one of them does have a a story. Not a single kart racer. So yeah, there's not even a single one that I could possibly think about. Yeah, pretty much. Maybe if you want to include Spy Hunter as a kart racer because it has a weaponry system, but still, except for that one, they have never had a story. So pretty much, as I always say, people, this element in this specific genre, I don't know why it hasn't been exploited yet. As I've said, I've read a lot of comments, fortunately, of people saying in videos now that we get gas games as a service, that we don't want all of that. We don't want all of that shit. It's unneeded. Just a proper gameplay system, good level design integration with it, enhancing replayability through the use of bots and a polished artificial intelligence. I'm seeing this more and more, and that gives me hope for the future that bots will make a comeback. For example, Unreal Tournament 3, the godlike bots, they're human-like. Perfectly executed. Another example of bots done right. So, people, as I've been mentioning, it can be done right. I gave you examples, logical examples, like Need for Speed, like classic Need for Speed games, like Driver San Francisco, like which was the other one? Midnight Club, Los Angeles, for example. I gave you examples of all of that. And as I've said, if I didn't have logical examples, I wouldn't highlight this as a flaw, but I do have them. So it could have been improved. It is partially addressed through the reality TV show. The game ends up in a cliffhanger, which is sad, when they were developing Split Second 2, and the development never happened. And in the context of this reality TV show, they could have designed the storyline. For example, see that I don't criticize if I don't give you the solution of what could have addressed it. They could have gone for a storyline of a rivalry. Generally racing games are about rivalries, or a journey like Need for Speed The Run, which is based upon a movie. They could do a cheap knockoff of a movie. Pretty much a cheap knockoff of a movie. See what I'm asking for? That would be more positive than not having a storyline at all, and it would greatly benefit the game, the racing genre as a whole. So please, developers, include some story. It doesn't matter if it's a cliche. It doesn't matter if it's the 10th million clone of Fast and Furious. It doesn't matter if well, you could go for an original story. That would be the most ideal solution. But it doesn't matter if just watch a movie about racing, and clone the story. That's better than not having a story at all, which has been a plague for this genre since its conception. That was partially addressed by Need for Speed Most Wanted 2005, but by Need for Speed Carbon, by Midnight Club Los Angeles, by Driver San Francisco, by some examples, and then we have an ocean of racing games without that, or with partial solutions like Split Second, or I think even Burnout Paradise. Burnout Paradise follows the same example of Need for Speed Most Wanted 2012, because it was developed by the same studio, which was Criterion, and they did it like that with the Most Wanted list. Involve the cops and capturing the racer, or if it's like Forza Motorsport, for example, in Forza Motorsport, like the professional path of a professional racer, for example, and with real rivalries. With this, there is no character development in racing games, and I will always heavily criticize that, as you can see. That's why I include this element, because it's the grandeur category of the analysis impacts different genres, genres in a different way. But that's not of an excuse. And you tell me you cannot expect an RPG story in a racing game. So that's simply way too much. They have to develop the physics and everything. No, yes, they should include it because it has been done before. And even if it hadn't been done before, the idea is to push forward, to improve, to add abstract complexity with replayability, with the artificial intelligence, and with the storyline. Because if you include any storyline, for example, in Need for Speed The Run, the 3DS entry is completely different than the home console version. It's completely different, but because of the fact that the story is different, that version is worth looking at. I bet you see the problem by now, people. I bet you see the problem by now. I bet you see the problem. A portable game from 2011, only 1 year after this release, with all of the limitations that, and the company going bankrupt, because I think it was Back Beer or something like that. It was also a British company. Even with that, they designed a story for Need for Speed The Run 3DS, the 3DS version, which looks gorgeous. I highly recommend it to you. And Need for Speed Carbon owned the city on the PSP. Even portable entries of those games have a story. So when people criticize Need for Speed, now it's way too easy, it's way too arcade, etc., etc., yeah. Complain about the gameplay mechanics all you want, but they include a story. It's a why would I want a cliche story? Otherwise I would watch Fast and Furious for the 10th time. It still has a story and it makes for a more complete package. Here with the reality TV show, it was as easy. Look at this. My limited mental perception can design it in a second. Watch. I will cite. I cannot believe I'm doing this, but I'll cite a cartoon from 2007. Total Drama Island. Yes, it was a cartoon from Cartoon Network, a Canadian cartoon, pretty well designed. That it was a reality TV show for kids. It was as easy as watching the 13 20-minute episodes of that season, copy all of the characters, change their names, and ensure that you don't get sued by changing their appearance or whatever, including them in game, giving them the Elite Racer gameplay mechanics, and creating rivalries between them, and adding them personalities. For example, their internal struggles. For example, what do they want the money for winning the prize of a split second, and that alone, with some few 5-minute cinematics, would have expanded the potential of this game tenfold. It would have been amazing. Another critical flaw that well, in this case, all of the racing genre is plagued by this flaw, but it won't stop me from highlighting it. So that would have solved that. It's not an RPG racer. Don't expect an RPG. Sacred 2 doesn't have the most complex story ever told, people. It's not fucking a Bioshock. I'm not expecting something like Bioshock or Dishonored. I'm not expecting Bioshock. I'm not expecting whatever. But Metroid Prime, for example, or Sacred 2, without going way too crazy about it. I'm not expecting Dragon Age Origins. But without going way too crazy, I understand the limitations of the genre, that the genre imposes on the grandeur category of the analysis in the case of racing games. But still, in the case of Mario Kart, it has a lot of fantasy elements that could contribute to it. In the case of Sonic All-Stars Racing Transformed, it has a lot of elements that could contribute to it. For example, imagine that for example, Cars 3, the movie, could be perfectly implemented in Sonic All-Stars Racing Transformed. I don't know if you know it, but in Cars 3, in case you want to watch, I highly recommend you that movie. It basically is about a retirement, about how Lightning McQueen eventually has to face the harsh reality that he doesn't have the physical capabilities of running of racing anymore, because there are more efficient designs of cars. In the case of Sonic, that could have been implemented with the cars, with a huge storyline, like Sonic is the fastest being of all time, and having a car, for example, beat him at a race, and that triggering the plot. The same as Cars, you are copying Cars 3 basically. See how a stupid design, I bet if you imagine it, it sounds good, because it is a good idea, because it's basic design. These are all ideas, what I've been mentioning, that would potentially enhance those games when I criticize them. So, in the case of a Split Second, with the reality TV show, watch some episodes of Total Drama Island. That's it. That's it, something like that. A rivalry. What do these? What do the? Imagine. What does Raptor want the money for? Right? What's his past? It's as easy as his father was alcoholic and whatever, or his mother was alcoholic or whatever, and basically the reality TV show will ensure that he saves his half brother who is in jail or in prison or something like that, and millions of, and like that with the 8 elite racers, at least 8. I'm asking for 8 short brief character developments. I'm not asking for Star Wars: The Old Republic, which has 8 fully fleshed. It's kind of like playing my favorite game of all time. It's like playing 8 times Dragon Age Origins, pretty much. So, or Mass Effect, or Knights of the Old Republic. So it's 8 storylines in one. I'm not asking for full-fledged ones, but develop them as much as you can. Create, for example, a choice system. And also, they could have also implemented then, after you beat the game, unlock, I don't know, an open world or something like, or a free play mode, in which you get random races and you can ally with those character developed rivals that you originally beat. They could have told an amazing story about the protagonist as well. For example, Forza Horizon keeps it simple. It keeps it simple, but it develops. For example, I remember in the first one, Marcus Flint. At least they design a character, and at least they give a sense of rivalry through the radio stations that they say, "Oh, Marcus Flint, you are getting challenged by the newbie, by the newcomer. He's getting close, etc." And it's progressively developed. Character development. That's what they all lack. In the case of Mario Kart, it's a crime that, and in the case of Sonic All Stars Racing Transformed, it's a crime that we don't get with such charismatic characters that we don't get a backstory on the racing. In that sense, a lot of people criticize Crash Tag Team Racing, but at least that one tried to solve it. Mario Tennis, the one from the GameCube, tries to solve it, and the GBA entries, in case you are interested, Power Tour, I believe they were, they have a full-fledged RPG system. Mario Tennis Power Tour, the one on the Game Boy Advance, proves that it can be done. That you can grab real-life elements like tennis tournaments or racing, that you can grab real-life sports and properly turn them into an RPG system with a storyline and everything. So it can be done, and there's no excuse not to do it. Even more with all of the options that Split Second has with the reality TV show. It was as simple as copying the most cheap and futile reality TV show, whichever one you liked, and add the character development of it. Well, let's get to the second element, because I got a bit lost. I get into rants, people, when I don't when I get so invested into the analysis. I get lost in thought, and it begins to become a rant. Well, but objectively, a design flaw that could have been addressed. Midnight Club Los Angeles solves it as well. Rush, LA Rush on the PSP and the PS2 solves it. Well, second part of the Grandeur category of the analysis, people. The soundtrack. In terms of the soundtrack, hats off. In that sense, the perfect the 3 laps soundtrack from the game. It's amazing. I love that it gradually unfolds as you complete the laps around the circuit. I love that it gradually unfolds, and it's one of my most favorite soundtracks of all time. It was pretty well designed. The soundtrack is perfect. It's such a shame that the story didn't follow the soundtrack, because it has one of the most memorable soundtracks I've seen. In that sense, it's superior to Forza Motorsport 3, to Forza Motorsport 2, to Ridge Racer, and it's on par with the amazing soundtrack of Burnout Paradise, right? And Need for Speed, the Need for Speed series, the Burnout Paradise series, and Midnight Club Los Angeles. They all have amazing soundtracks with the EA tracks and the Rockstar tracks. Pretty much, the EA is called Tracks with an X. It wasn't a mistake, people, in case you're wondering. So yeah. In that sense, I think the best soundtrack ever, I would award it to Need for Speed Underground. Still. Then Forza Horizon also has a pretty good selection with a lot of variety. But in terms of not using licensed soundtracks, Split Second does a pretty good job. So the end conclusion of all of this is blame fucking Disney. This game had the ambition of a project with a much higher budget that it probably got. The dissociation between the ideas represented in the game and the budget to execute it, it's clearly abysmal. The dissociation between what they wanted to achieve and what they got, it's absolutely brutal, because they have all of the right ideas, but clearly they couldn't implement, for example, a licensed soundtrack, licensed cars. This game, I would say, is a matter of budget rather than talent, 100%. So what do, people? We blame fucking Disney, because the gameplay loop is correct, because everything is correct, but the parts of the game that definitely required adjusting are all directly related to the budget. It's not that you will tell me, Racer, about all games at some point they run out of budget. They have to, you do what you can with the amount of money that you have. Yes, but they don't have the glaring problems directly derived from a lack of budget as this game, like not having licensed cars, for example, not having a licensed soundtrack. They are directly related to the budget. It doesn't have to do with talent, for example. Lack of a randomized tournament mode, for example, that one we could attribute it to a deficiency in the level design. But the other two elements are directly tied to the budget. And the lack of a storyline, directly tied to the budget. I bet the developers of this game could have hired any storyboard, any storyteller that could have efficiently fixed those issues 100%. So yeah, pretty much lacking of a storyline is directly tied to the lack of a budget. They are all related to that. So, but it doesn't change the fact that they are flaws, people. It doesn't change the fact that they are flaws. I gave you logical examples, metaphysically, objective logical examples that it could have been fixed, and it wasn't. So in terms of the soundtrack, it doesn't use licensed soundtracks, so they did the best that they could with their soundtrack. I think it's pretty unique. It perfectly blends with the environment, and I think it was tailored specifically to highlight the impact and the tension of the power plays, which is amazing. The sound gets distorted when you get close to a power play's point of impact, so that's a pretty good element that it doesn't get highlighted enough. in reviews probably. So amazing, absolutely amazing. And I can assure you that it blends perfectly. You could see that it blends perfectly with the environment. In that sense, the soundtrack, I would say, it could be a deliberate design choice, not the storyline, but the soundtrack, yes. And with all of that, we get to the final category of the analysis, which will be another strong point. It will be another strong point, just like the technical aspect of the game. They are strong points, undeniably, just like the graphical effects. The innovation of category of the analysis, it's a unique game. You won't find the gameplay mechanics anywhere else. Just like what I said with Sacred 2, in that sense, the innovation, it's absolutely perfect. The power play mechanic doesn't exist anywhere else. We cannot criticize it at all. The fact that the hitboxes are accurate when implemented within the physics system of the game, it's a difficult feat to achieve, and the crowning achievement of the game, perfectly designed. In terms of the innovation, a lot of elements, the level 2 power play, the fact that you can change the shortcuts, it has its explosion of creativity that you won't find anywhere else. In that sense, with a bit more of personality, that's the problem, that all of this that I'm mentioning would have been exponentially enhanced through the personality of the characters that they could have implemented in the storyline of the game. It would have been amazing to precisely a reality TV. There are not many games that are based off of reality TV shows with all of the characters. As I've said, it would have been easily, positively, the game would have benefited a lot easily from just implementing that. Easily, it would have exponentially enhanced the quality, and it would have been an instant classic, and it would have probably warranted a sequel. But well, it's Disney, people. We cannot expect much from people who do a lot of horrible things like imposing political agendas and the such. They have a if I know about that, being a Star Wars fans and what they did with the legendary expanded universe of Star Wars, they completely decimated it. Star Wars Acolytes is a pile of shit. The new trilogy that Disney did is a pile of shit. I don't want to get into the objective reasons as to why I have so many that I would spend. I can spend 10 hours probably talking about how everything that is wrong with modern Star Wars, everything that they produce is shit. Even and you know why the Mandalorian is the only decent one? It's not good. It's regular. 4 out of 10, I would say. The Mandalorian and the other one, and Rogue One, that are praised so much. You know why? Because they are made by Dave Filoni, who is the creator of the Clone Wars. That's the problem, people. That's the problem. That technically they already had that asset, and they just decided, let's not ruin that. Let's leave that as it was originally. That's why I always say that Dave Filoni is the only possible hope of Star Wars. But he needs to be left alone, without shitty politics, because they forced him to implement shitty politics in the last season of Star Wars: The Clone Wars, in the 7th season, which have nothing. It's kind of like an isolated arc. That is absolutely disgusting. I kind of like grabbed, and then they allowed him to finish the finales with dignity and his excellence. All right, so in terms of the innovation, the gameplay mechanics are extremely amazing. I mean, how they redefine the genre, the kart racing genre, and the arcade racing genre. In that sense, they redefine the mechanics. They redefine the mechanics of the genre in a lot of ways that I have described in the gameplay category of the analysis. So we have to address that. In that sense, has a lot of innovation, it has a lot of creativity, and this is the reason that still keeps this game alive, because of the degree of integration of that innovation within the gameplay mechanics, because it's fresh, it feels unique, it feels like this game was designed to be something different, and it is indeed the case. Sadly, they ran out of budget, I presume, with 100% degree of accuracy, because this happens to all games. But still, the innovation is amazing. From the power play system, or how the pure racing mechanics constitute the economic system of the game, and how that revolutionizes the power play, the weaponry system of the game. The weaponry system of the game. It's incredible that it has an integration of an economic system that unlocks the weaponry system, as I've said, and the fact that you cannot just make contact with the physical weapons, and you can and you just get the weapons. The fact that the defensive system revolves around the crash mechanic inherited from Burnout, and everything. The fact that it implements the crash mechanic within a kart racer is absolutely amazing. So in that sense, the innovation category is absolutely perfect. It redefines it breaks through a lot of barriers, a lot of conventional barriers that the kart racing genre has been known for. Physical weapons, 100% efficiency of the blue shell, blah 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 blah. It breaks those conventions and creates a new, fresh system. Alright, people. So now that we've addressed all of the categories of the analysis for Split Second, let's get to the moment you've been waiting for, the final qualification. As I've said, the lack of replayability, and the problem with as I've said, with the related to the efficiency of the artificial intelligence and the lack of replayability of the level design are the main two critical flaws. They are not slight flaws, because they degrade the replayability, the value of the replayability of the game. The lack of a storyline that, as I've said, it is incorporated in a lot of other racing games, as I've said, Driver San Francisco, Midnight Club Los Angeles, Need for Speed Most Wanted 2005, a lot of examples with decent storylines. I don't care if they copy Need for Speed The Run, Need for Speed Carbon on the City, I don't care if they copy a movie, but they should be present. And here there's a lot of missed opportunities, because it was a reality. The game represents a reality TV show, and that's the third critical flaw of the game. They are not slight flaws. I need you to understand these, people. If you're watching this as an analysis and you love the game, you need to understand that they're critical flaws, because they straight up eliminate elements of the analysis altogether. They eliminate them, and while the gameplay mechanics are solid, and that's the fail safe. I'm not expecting a story like as I've said, like in BioShock, like in Dishonored or something like that. But as I've said, the complexity of the artificial intelligence, it was solved in Mod Nation Racers. As I've said, the rubber banding should have been implemented in this game. The storyline was solved in those three games that I mentioned, Driver San Francisco as an example, or as I've said, Need for Speed Most Wanted 2005. And then the level design, the lack of replayability, was solved in Forza Motorsport 3 with the seasonal system. With the season system, in which you can keep playing seasons and keep playing the game. You don't like that. You don't like it like that. It's way too complex. Include the tournament mode that is included in Mario Kart, in Scars, or even in Sonic All-Stars Racing Transformed, which is the most efficient kart racer solution. As I've said, you can incorporate the platinum difficulty with and you can create your custom tournaments. And with those two, you get a new game plus and a tournament mode with platinum difficulty. With that, Sonic All-Stars Racing Transformed solves that. It's true that Mario Kart, for example, hasn't solved that efficiently, but still it has tournament mode. This game doesn't even have tournament mode. You have to play the races one by one, like in quick race mode, and you cannot create your own tournaments. So that's a basic tool that should always be there, at least. It's kind of like the bare minimum tournament. If on top of that you add New Game Plus like Sonic All-Stars Racing Transformed or the seasonal system of Forza Motorsport 3, good for you, even better. But the very least, the very minimum, is tournament mode, and I cannot believe that I couldn't find it here. It should be found. It definitely should. Tournament mode would have at least ensured that that is solved. So people, because of these three critical flaws, that I have mentioned, as you can see, I give you logical reasons as to why the game could have been much better. I found so many reasons in these 3 hours and 20 minutes, so many reasons that I bet you by now you even agree with me that with the storyline, with everything that I have mentioned, it could have been a perfect game. As it is, this game, I'll award split second because of the solid gameplay mechanics, because of the solid innovation of the gameplay system and everything. With those two things alone, remember that I deal with real qualifications. This is not a festival like Metacritic. I'll award it a C+. A C+, which translated to a numeric score would be a 6.8, I would say. Close to 7, but it doesn't get to 7. A 6.8, a 6.7. Why? Oh, because consider this. Those whole 6 points, the whole C+, all of it is lifted by the gameplay mechanics, the innovation, and the brilliant technical aspect of the game. Brilliant graphics, incredible innovation, precisely that it redefines the genre a lot. So 6 points due to that exclusively, and because of the smooth controls and, as I've said, the gameplay mechanics and a defensive system and everything that I said. Because the rest of the elements are non-existent. It doesn't have a story. It doesn't have the bare minimum amount of replayability required, which is a tournament mode, an offline tournament mode. And no, multiplayer mode is not an excuse for that. Never. Never, people. Never. Because even in multiplayer, you cannot do a tournament. You can only play quick races. So even if you could argue that, it wouldn't be a logical argument. Because it doesn't have online tournament mode. It's quick race only. The fact that you cannot increase the amount of laps, another basic mistake, destroys replayability even further. So a game with such a limited component of replayability, which is just quick race, split screen or multiplayer, doesn't matter, lacks the bare minimum tools to enhance the majestic gameplay, the fascinating and ingenious gameplay system that it has. That is the problem. We get perfect gameplay mechanics with a lot of innovation, that's why it's a tragedy and it's absolutely sad. But the replayability aspect, the grandeur, and the artificial the storyline, the lack of a storyline, the lack of proper rubber banding of the artificial intelligence, and the lack of a tournament mode as the bare minimum of the level design of a game mode, those three are critical flaws that together degrade replayability completely. You won't come back to this game for the story, because it doesn't have one. You won't come back to this game because of a tournament mode that you can play casually. For example, I still play Mario Kart 7 on my 3DS from time to time. Granted, not as much as Mario Kart 8. No, of course. But still, if I, with CTGP, for example, with the mod, it added new tournaments. Problem solved. A lot of people are still playing CTGP, and notice this. There's a custom network called the Pretendo network, developed by modders, and CTGP was previous to that. The online of CTGP was revived previously to that. The Pretendo network is kind of like reviving online capabilities for the 3DS. The CTGP fueled the revival of the Nintendo network altogether because of that, because it understood that even with offline mode, it added so many tournaments that it ensured it secured the replayability of the game. I will make a prediction here. Today is the 10th of September of 2024. I predict that Mario Maker will stay relevant for a lot of years. Why? Because even if you cannot share levels, the second the levels are preserved, which is what happens, the same goes for Little Big Planet, their replayability becomes infinite. Why is it that Sacred 2 can still be played today and I awarded it a perfect qualification? Because of the replayability. Because it perfectly enhances replayability with the 3 difficulty modes, for example. Split Second, it's an absolute tragedy. Because with a simple tournament mode, the bare minimum, it would have at least increased the qualification to an 8. With the bare minimum. If on top of a tournament mode they would have added a story and a proper rubber banding competitive artificial intelligence, it would have been a perfect 10 out of 10 case, and it's an absolute shame. I hope a modder can fix all of these things, but the vanilla game, I mean the Civer version that I've been playing, the game by itself as it is now, I awarded a C+, a 6.8, as I've said. It doesn't get to 7, it is close because of how solid the gameplay mechanics are, because of how solid the innovation, the insane amount of innovation that it brings, and because of the perfectly fleshed out technical aspect. But those alone are not enough to ensure the survival of the legacy of this beautiful kart racer. For example, if I fire up Scars right now, I create a custom tournament, I add a lot of tournament, and I can play it perfectly. Mario Kart, the same. Sonic All-Stars Racing Transformed, the same. It has New Game Plus, so you have to play the game twice. And on top of that, it has tournament mode, so the most efficient solution. Mod Nation Racers, it has the best rubber banding artificial intelligence you'll stumble upon. Forza, in the case of Burnout Paradise, Forza Horizon, the rest, they have the open world going on. Midnight Club, open world, and an amazing story. Need for Speed Most Wanted, open world, an amazing story. A cliche from Fast and Furious, but it's still there. Driver San Francisco, which is the one that I want to analyze to show you the comparison. Then, Driver San Francisco, you have a story. You can transfer your soul from one car to the other one. Amazing. This one doesn't have the story, doesn't have the rubber band artificial intelligence properly adjusted, and it doesn't have the level design to enhance all of the good qualities that it has. All of the perfect qualities of the gameplay and the innovation are then destroyed by the lack of a tournament mode. It makes no sense not to include it. It doesn't even work on multiplayer. So what's the point? It directly degrades replayability, even on the online multiplayer, that you can only play quick race instead of tournament mode. Even like that, the community would have appreciated that even more. I'm not even talking about an editor mode like Trackmania, for example. I can think about more examples, but that would further depress, and well, it would justify my qualification, a C+, pretty much. Because I will agree on this, people. The gameplay mechanics are some of the best of all time. The gameplay mechanics are some of the best of all time. I get why a lot of people refer to this game as one of the best racing games of all time. And for a lot of people, it's the best kart racer of all time. Because the mechanics are there, the physics are there, the engine of the game is there, of a perfect game is there, and it lacks content. But the formula, it's perfect. The gameplay loop is perfect. The content isn't. But the gameplay loop is perfect. As I've said, there are several ways that I have highlighted today that could have solved this, but they weren't implemented because of lack of development time, lack of budget, whichever condition you might want to think about. But still, they could have been addressed and they weren't, and that indicates lack of planning ahead by the developer, and or lack of budget is at the end of the day lack of planning ahead. People, if you run out of budget, it's your own fault, and pretty much because you didn't measure it correctly, because you were way too ambitious. This game, we could have ditched the multiplayer portion of it, like never pay for servers back when they did the original release, and instead implement a tournament mode, which cannot take more than... It's not something crazy. A story, well, would have been a bit more to ask for, but still, there would have been all elements that would have enhanced the final product to such lengths that it would have made a much more cohesive and complete package. So, ladies and gentlemen, hope you enjoyed the analysis. If you like the game, trust me, I now understand you more than I do if you're watching this as a YouTube bot. In the future, I'm mentioning this because the other day someone in a YouTube bot told me that their favorite game was, for example, Heroes of Annihilated Empires. That not his favorite game, that he loved the game completely, but the person also admitted that all of my points were backed by a lot of logic and that the analysis was objective, which is pretty much the idea behind all of this. So you have the most precise description of it, metaphysically objective description of it. So I recommend you play the game regardless of the qualification. It's an experience that you should do, that you should have. Play the Civer edition on PC, you get the 60 FPS, and then get the Xbox 360 version or the PS3 version with the DLC to get Onslaught mode. I would still recommend you get the game, because as I said, the gameplay loop is perfect, but objectively analyzing it, it's lacking those three critical elements, that they're not slight flaws. As I've said, I can, for example, when I said that Sacred 2 has could have had much more accuracy in terms of the targeting system by allowing the player to target the ground, or the fact that there isn't a rotation implemented, that there isn't a cohesive sequence of activation of your abilities to enhance damage, and thus that prevented the game from creating a rotation in which there would be an order to be that needs to be memorized. Those are all slight flaws, questionable design choices that don't break the main package, the content that the game offers to the player. In the case of a split second, we get perfect gameplay with the worst solutions for addressing content and the legacy of those perfect mechanics. So this happened to me a lot of times. It happened to me a lot of times, and it's pretty much kind of like the other face of the same coin. You need to have good gameplay. You need to design the perfect gameplay loop, and then take the time to expand the context surrounding that gameplay loop. Here the context is not expanded because there's no storyline, because they didn't measure the difficulty of the artificial intelligence correctly, and they should have gone for the tested formula of a brutal rubber banding, like Mob Nation Racers. They could have gone for the storyline of Need for Speed The Run, Midnight Club Los Angeles, etc. And they should have addressed the problem of replayability by looking at Sonic All-Stars Racing Transformed. I think it wasn't released back then, but even then there was a predecessor that also addressed this. Mod Nation Racers, or even Mario Kart with the tournament mode. At least the tournament mode. Here there's not even tournament mode. It's all multiplayer or split screen, but quick races. You cannot create your tournament mode. If that is ever possible, the game would be at least much better. But single races, kind of like without a scoring system that links the tournament scores, the isolated races scores, it's a critical flaw in terms of replayability. It degrades and destroys replayability to such a degree that it's absolutely atrocious. I thought there was at least tournament mode. At least with tournament mode, it would have been partially addressed. New Game Plus, partially addressed. Well, seasonal system of Forza Motorsport 3 would have been amazing. With the episodes acting as part of a season, they had the perfect excuse. With a proper story and everything, it would have been 10 out of 10. It would have been probably the best racing game of all time. Or at least the best kart racer of all time. And we wouldn't have the stupid comparisons with Blur. In that sense, I think Blur is even worse, because it does all of the mistakes of this game. But on top of that, it doesn't have the innovation of the power play system. So in that sense, Blur, I won't do a review of Blur. I completed it on the hardest difficulty. Blur would be kind of like the worst example. I played it. It wasn't completely bad. It had a pretty good handling because it was made by Bizarre Creations. But still, I don't know if it has tournament mode, huh? That would be quite interesting. If it has tournament mode, I will need to think about it. But yeah, as it stands, Split Second desperately needs tournament mode, some kind of randomization of the level design. Because otherwise, both for multiplayer and offline play, like, it's absolutely needed for both of them. Alright, people, it's been my pleasure sharing today's analysis of Split Second with all of you. Hope you enjoyed the analysis. If you love the game, leave it in the comments down below of the YouTube board in case you want to tell me that I'm wrong about some things and we can debate them. No worries whatsoever. But as I always say, I want to find metaphysical reality. The purpose of my analysis is not to... I love this game, but see that even if I love the game, I can address metaphysical reality. See what I always mention, the difference between our mental perception and metaphysical reality. It is undeniable that replayability plays a big psychological role in terms of enhancing the psychological sense of progression on the player. So in that sense, perfect gameplay loop and terrible content. In that sense, 12 hours without a tournament mode, it's unacceptable, pretty much. So, but you enjoyed my crazy metaphysical reviews, as I always say, thanks to special thanks to Discord members and followers of the Twitch channel from the bottom of my heart.